Good afternoon and welcome to the Privileges and Elections Committee. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Bell.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. What we're going to do before we take up the governor's nominations, Senator Peterson and Senator Stewart need to be across the hall in Ag. So I told them we'd take them first. They have similar bills with SB 45 from Senator Peterson and SB 568 from Senator Stewart. What I'm going to suggest we do, unless you want to roll them together, is that you each present them, but we hear public comment on both bills, and people can explain if they prefer one or the other or something. And we'll take 3 minutes on each side from the public, but let's have you present your bills, starting with Senator Peterson.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, first of all, thank you very much. I'm proud to be here with Senator Stewart, or as we like to refer ourselves as Tweedledee and Tweedledum, as long as he's dumb and I'm D. But anyways, we're here to present these bills. This is the bill I've carried since 2017, which is the bill to prohibit contributions to candidates for political office, state political office, from public utilities. The public utilities is a defined term under 56-232 of the code, obviously electric utilities. We've made this much more narrow. The original bill was public service corporations. And the idea is to get at this idea of regulated monopolies, i.e. Dominion power, Appalachian power, being able to make contributions to state lawmakers. Now, how did we get here? 2015, when I was in the Senate, the bill was passed called the Rate Freeze Law, which basically froze the jurisdiction of the State Corporation Commission over our electric rates. And as a result, Dominion made billions of dollars. That was a piece of legislation that literally shifted wealth from the ratepayers of the Commonwealth to Dominion power. In 2017, I attempted to repeal that. My bill was defeated. And I then brought a bill because, frankly, I was concerned about the money of Dominion in this body to take away their ability to make political donations. That bill has been before you ever since 2017 until today. Now, there are 4 arguments against my bill, and I'm going to address each one in turn. First one is freedom of speech, that there is a First Amendment right to freedom of speech, and therefore Dominion power, whether it's a monopoly, whether it's a corporation, should be able to make donations. I would simply point out that the majority of states in the United States do not allow corporate donations to their candidates. I would also point out that in the U.S. Congress that donations are strictly capped to congressional candidates. So the United States Supreme Court has already found those limits to be constitutional and within the First Amendment, and obviously we do have these restrictions at the federal level. So that's number one, freedom of speech. Number 2 is this issue of, well, you're picking on one corporation. We've got so many corporations in Virginia. I own a business. Somebody else owns a business. The difference is a defined public utility is, quite frankly, a monopoly by state fiat, and therefore it has extraordinary powers. And among its powers are the ability to have its profitability set by the State Corporation Commission, whose jurisdiction is set by us. We determine the profitability of these public utilities. And again, if we're taking money directly from Dominion, that in my opinion, is a conflict of interest. Third, and this is a cogent point, and I'm happy to take questions on this. What about the fact that other people give money to you, Chap, or they give money to you, Richard, or they give money to other, and so you're shutting off the pro-Dominion people, but what about the anti-Dominion people? And to which I can only respond, well, first of all, one's a monopoly and one's not, but if there's a certain PAC or if there's a certain individual and you want me to forswear donations for that individual in order to pass this bill, I'll do it. I'll do it. So just tell me. But you got to get the bill passed. So in terms of making this bilateral for both sides of the political conversation, that's a non-issue to me. I'm not worried about money. It's just a question of, again, one corporation being able to control its own profitability through this body. Fourth is this issue of low rates, and I'm going to call this the boss tweed argument. For years in New York in the 19th century, the Tammany machine controlled New York politics, and the issue was, yeah, it's corrupt, but at least we're safe. And so the issue is, yeah, it's not right, but hey, we have low rates. Well, actually, our rates are not as low as our sister states. In fact, if you look around to our peer group, which is West Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky, and Tennessee, our price per kilowatt hour is $12.18 compared to 1180 for West Virginia, 1138 for North Carolina, 1087 for Kentucky, or 1076 for Tennessee. Our rates are higher than every southern state but two, Alabama and South Carolina. Every other southern state, and I'm counting at least a dozen here, have lower per kilowatt hour rates than we do. I can go on. The VEPCO compared to all these other states, and these are, and the peer utilities, I can go on and on. But the bottom line is, and I'm not saying, by the way, that if you pass this legislation that automatically the rates will fall. I'm just saying that the system will be cleaner, and I believe it'll be more responsive. So I ask you to pass the bill, and that's the balance of what I have.
Before we ask the committee members if they have questions, I'd like to just ask one or two.
Yes.
Does your bill apply to natural gas utilities?
No, I don't believe they're considered public utilities, although
Okay.
I don't have the code section in front
It does not
of me.
cover electric cooperatives either, right?
It does not cover co-ops.
Thank you. Okay, Senator Stewart, why don't you make your presentation, then we'll take questions for both of you from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the
And what's your bill
committee.
number?
Chap has given very cogent arguments for this bill, and I'm not going to reiterate what he said. But here's the bottom line. We are supposed to be regulating public utilities that are subject to regulation. We, the General Assembly. You've seen these bills in the past 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, which have taken a vast amount of authority away from the SEC, and we have been substituting our own judgment for the State Corporation Commission. And then we accept donations from public utilities in order to, at least from outward appearances, influence how we would vote on these bills. And I'm not saying that it has influenced anybody. But as lawyers, we have an ethical duty to avoid what is called an appearance of impropriety. And this is clearly an appearance of impropriety. In fact, I think it's absolutely a direct conflict to take money from that organization which you are regulating as a body. And I've taken their donations before. I think everybody probably has, very few do. The interesting thing about it is they give everybody money. If they don't give it directly to you, they give it to somebody else who gives it to you or whatever. I've not been filing these bills like Chap has, but this year I was just really galled when I saw that Dominion Power donated almost $300,000 from the corporation and its top 4 executives to a surreptitious PAC to influence an election. And to me, that was just beyond the pale, and I felt compelled to file this bill to try to stop this activity because clearly they've become too powerful in Richmond. So what my bill does is it prohibits a public utility from spending money to influence an election, period. It doesn't put a burden on a candidate because sometimes, if you're like me, you have a treasurer, and that treasurer receives donations. You don't always know for a while who may have given you money. So it just prohibits them from spending this money, and there's a fine for that depending upon how you proceed. I do not believe that this would prohibit an employee PAC. I think an employee PAC has every right to give money. That's their own money. It's not the corporation's money. And they are, as employees, they should be able to do that, but it would clearly prohibit any public utility. And those are the differences between my bill and Chap's.
Senator Stewart, before I ask Senator Deeds, he had a question. I wanted to ask, you mentioned about regulating people with business before the General Assembly, accepting contributions from them. Your bill and Senator Peterson's bill don't prohibit contributions from banks or insurance companies or telecommunication providers or water companies. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And Senator Deeds had a question.
Yeah.
But I would say that that's apples and oranges, Mr. Chairman.
I just want to understand the distinctions between the bills. Chap's bill is aimed at a candidate or a committee. They can't accept or solicit. Your bill says that a utility can't And if they do, they're going to be penalized $10,000 or up to 3 times the amount of the contribution.
Whichever's greater.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. We'll now take public testimony up to 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question?
Senator Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would send this to either patron of the bill and even council. One of my concerns is I've got the Dulles Greenway, which there's been a lot of attention about bills from that. That's a publicly regulated company that in the past I know has made political contributions. I would be more comfortable if this said any publicly regulated company. I don't know if we can get to that by service company or publicly regulated company, but I feel like there's other ones that fall into this same category as this one, and I would feel more comfortable if we captured all of them versus just saying public utilities. Could any of you respond to that, please? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would say to Senator Bill, if he can help us get this bill out of the committee, we'll be glad to talk about an amendment on the floor.
Okay.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Spruill had a question,
I
and
do
then
too.
Senator Serval.
Thanks.
Questions, Senator Chap Peterson, please.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Do we have any other, Mr. Chairman, I have 3 questions. Do we have any other utility company that donate to constituents, to politicians? Any other utility company?
Utility companies, I think, the electric utilities would be Dominion and Appalachian Power. Those would be the defined public utilities. If you were to count the natural gas companies, and again, I think they're public service corporations and not defined utilities, but that would be, I think Washington Gas makes some donations. Maybe Columbia does. I don't know. But I think, obviously, Dominion Power and Appalachian Power would be the most obvious.
Mr. Chairman, second question.
Yes, proceed.
For 5 years, I've been hearing you speak for 5 years. Do you really have a real hard-on or dislike for Dominion? Because it's not, to me, it's a personal thing with you, but Dominion. I can see what you were trying to do. It makes sense. But I'm saying, but from the way you're talking, like you just have a real hard-on against Dominion. Is it personal against Dominion, or are you trying to do what's right, or just something that you dislike for Dominion because you don't like them?
You know, I don't want to reiterate your question verbatim. But, you know, I can honestly say, Senator Spruill, that I don't have any animosity towards anybody. I mean, maybe in my life I've been lucky. I've been married to a beautiful woman. I got great kids. I have no animosity towards anybody. I will just tell you this, though. I have practiced law in this field. No other state in the union has the public utility make donations to state lawmakers. We are unique. So I will simply say that.
Okay, I think Senator Serval had a question.
I do, Mr. Chairman, reclaiming my microphone from Senator Spruill. And I would just, I haven't seen Senator Peterson play rugby, but I'd be surprised if he doesn't show animosity for the other team on the field. But here's my question for either one of you. Happy to take it, but you know, as soon as we put a cap on one category of donors or a prohibition, what is there to prohibit either the corporation from contributing to, for example, the DLCC, to a 501c4, to a 527 registered organization at the federal level, and or their employees separately writing checks and bundling them in a way, you know, I mean, what is there to prohibit any of them from doing the exact same thing they're doing through the front door, through the back door? Because it just seems to me every time the problem that's happened in the federal system is you put all these caps in place and people just spend the same amount of money. They just do it in ways you can't see. So, you know, the U.S. Supreme Court, I think, has held that we can't restrict certain kinds of speech in those other venues like through C4s and others. And without a provision that prohibits coordination, it seems to me that money can be given to one entity and then call the entity and say, you know, here's where we'd like it to go, and it just comes from a different place without their name on it. So, I mean, how do you prohibit all those types of them doing the exact same thing just in a way that the people can't see it?
If they are intentionally doing that, I think my bill would prohibit that. That's the way it's drafted. I could be wrong. It may need an amendment, but it prohibits them from donating money, period. in a wide variety of categories from influencing elections. And so if they did that and called the person and said, this is what I wanted to do, they'd be violating this bill. Now, if it was tongue-in-cheek, it would be hard to prove. I get it. But that's the way I drafted my bill to deal with that situation.
I'm going to respond to that because the most effective set of laws in human history was written on one stone tablet. It was called the Ten Commandments, okay? And the bottom line is there's no law in history that you couldn't find a way to subvert if you're clever enough. But the point of passing a law is not just to prohibit conduct, it's also to make a statement. And passing this bill would make a statement. Now, can people figure out a way to evade it? Yeah, maybe they could. They can figure out a way to avoid any law in those books over there. But we'd be making a statement, and that's an important statement.
Okay, Senator McClellan had a question.
Thank you. I think it's more of a comment. I know over the years we've struggled with the definition of a public utility, and I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page because public utility is defined in many different code sections. The definition both of these bills are drawn to, I just want to make sure both patrons that this was your intent, is every corporation other than a municipality, company, individual, or association of individuals or cooperatives, their lessees, trustees, or receivers, etc., who may own, manage, control any plant or equipment or part of plant or equipment for the conveyance of telephone messages, the production, transmission, delivery, and furnishing of heat, chilled air, chilled water, light, power, water or sewer facilities, etc. So I want to make sure that's the definition you intended, just because public utility is defined multiple different ways, and most of your conversation has been pointed to one particular public utility.
All right.
So that's just my question.
Well,
Senator Deeds and then Senator McDougal.
So, Mr. Chair, Senator McClellan, your point is that the public utility would be broader than just electric utilities. You're talking about gas, telephone, water, sewage, anything.
In the code section their bill is directed to, there is another code section that defines public utility more limited to electric companies. And I guess my question for the patrons is this drawn to the definition you intended, or is this broader than you intended?
well, I will say the original bill was drawn to public service corporations. We've used this bill. First of all, I don't believe any wastewater treatment systems are at issue. So the issue would really be a company that, for example, does heating, air, but again, it would have to be a public utility. Or telephone.
Or telephone.
So I don't know if we have any public utility telephone companies.
Well, Mr. Chair,
I mean, if you want to make an amendment and draw it to another section,
yeah.
you know, I bring this bill up every 5 years, and always everyone's got a clever comment, you know, but again, this is much narrower than Public Service Corporation.
Yeah.
But if you want to draw it to whatever other definition you have.
And Mr. Chair, that's why I raise it. There is
Sure.
another code section, we just need to find it, that does define public utilities more narrowly to what you're talking about. It's just not this one. So we just got to make sure we're pulling in the right code section.
Okay, well, that's certainly something we can address.
We've got Senator McDougal next in the queue.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. This is Chap. I do not know the answer, so I'm asking you this as a question. There's a case, Western Tradition Partnership, that was out of Montana. I guess Montana had a somewhat similar prohibition that banned any expenditure to a political committee or associated with a candidate from a corporation, and the Supreme Court struck that down.
Which U.S. Supreme Court?
U.S. Supreme Court. They granted the petition for certiorari.
What year was that?
2012.
Okay.
And reversed the Montana Supreme Court, which had held as constitutional. So what distinguishes what you're doing from this case?
Well, first of all, that's not every corporate. This is just one public utility is defined. But more importantly, there's all kinds of states that have restrictions or prohibitions on corporate donations. In fact, I think it's the majority. I mean, we're unusual in that we allow corporate donations. So I don't know anything about Montana law. I don't know anything about the facts. And like I said, I'm
Mr. Chairman, maybe after this, you can look at it, it just reads, political speech does not lose First Amendment protection simply because its source is a corporation. And that's what it says. And so I'm just trying to distinguish how this case, which would say that's unconstitutional, is from what your statute is. So
You can trust your lying eyes, or you can trust me, so.
Okay. Okay, we've got Senator Mason is next in the queue.
Senator Peterson, while Senator Stewart may be new to this effort, each year you bring another bill alongside this, which you brought last week to cap all contributions from individuals,
I did.
corporations. And you brought that again this year, is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Unless there are other questions from the committee, we're going to open it up to public testimony. We're going to have 3 minutes for those who are in favor of the bill. Are there any people in the room who are in favor of the bill? Would like to come forward and introduce yourself?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bob Shippey. I'm a volunteer with Sierra Club. We support the bill. I think most of the criticism of this bill relates to, well, what about other companies, or what about, is there some loophole? And I would just say there are very few bills that go through this body that solve an entire problem that's as big as this. So I would just not demand a perfect bill, and I would encourage you to report it. Thank you.
Okay. And now we're going to hear from if there's no one else in the room who'd like to speak for it, if people virtually would like to speak for it, please raise your virtual hand.
Mr. Chairman, we have a couple speakers wishing to speak.
Okay.
Beginning with Amy Bergner. Please unmute and begin your testimony. Amy Bergner, please unmute and begin your testimony. Ms. Bergner, please unmute and begin your testimony.
If Ms. Bergner is not able to unmute, the next speaker in favor is Janet Boyd.
I've got it.
Oh, Amy. Okay, thank you, Ms. Bergner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Amy Bergner, and I represent the Virginia Grassroots Coalition, which is made up of about 50 organizations around the state and has thousands of members. And we urge you to approve these bills. Unlike the majority of states, as you've heard, we have a really unlevel playing field here in Virginia when it comes to campaign contributions. And these types of contributions really put an upward spiral of spending on our campaigns. Since 1996, regulated monopolies have contributed nearly $20 million to Virginia legislators. And these are the same organizations that the General Assembly is supposed to be providing oversight for. Unfortunately, the General Assembly has chosen to be kind of derelict and support this conflict of interest. And as a result, we are facing extremely high utility rates in Virginia, as you've heard. So we are now paying the 8th highest utility rates in the country, and as you've heard, the highest in the region. So we really appreciate your attention to this, and I would also support what Mr. Shippey said, that it's very important not to make the perfect the enemy of the good. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we've got about a minute remaining, a little bit more, and we've got about 6 speakers, so I'd ask you to keep your remarks short if you can. Ms. Janet Boyd, I believe you're next.
Thank you very much. The League of Women Voters supports both bills, which would be the first time in Virginia that any limitations would be placed on campaign contributions. Public service or public utility companies, political committees or PACs should not be allowed to make campaign contributions to any candidate who, if they win, would be charged with making laws directly regulating the company making the contribution. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And Ms. Andrea Lewis, you're next. If you could keep your remarks on the brief side, we're limited.
Good afternoon. Thank you for accepting my testimony today. I'm in Springfield, Virginia, and I've been a rate-paying Virginian for 30 years. I want to voice my support for SB 45 and 568 because these bills will help bring Virginia in line with over half of the states in our country who rightfully take steps to protect our ratepayers from the undue influence of state monopolies. Let's please ensure that the voices of captive Virginia ratepayers are heard more loudly in government than those of our state monopolies.
Thank you.
Please vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you. And I ask the remaining speakers to state your name and your position, and if you're with a group, please, that would be helpful. I believe the next one is Becky Little.
Hi, I'm Becky Lytle from Midlothian. Thank you for this bill, and thank you for the great intention behind it for ethical dealings for our state. I'm in favor of it 1,000%. Thank you both senators for both bills.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Connie Wright Zink.
Yes, I'm Connie Wright Zink. I'm from Augusta County in Virginia. I am in favor of these bills. I am also in favor of these bills as a member of Virginia Organizing, who has been working very hard to try to support protections and get rid of the unfair advantage that the utilities have at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nancy Morgan, if you could tell us where you're from and your position briefly.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm with the Virginia chapter of American Promise from Alexandria, and in the absence of any limitations bill, which they haven't been passed, our group supports this bill. Obviously, there's precedent, as the patrons have said. There are quite a few states that actually prohibit public utilities from making contributions, and there is precedent. As for Senator Searle's concerned about the fungibility of money coming in, strong disclosure bills have been used in other states, which force reporting, and that's the answer to his concern. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Heather Mitchell.
Heather Mitchell, please unmute. Ms. Mitchell, please unmute. Mr. Chairman, I believe Heather Mitchell is not here with us.
Okay, Mr. Stephen Spitz, you're next.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to add, I'm from Falls Church in Fairfax County. I just wanted to add what should be obvious but needs to be stated openly. And that is, we had a situation in 2015 where Dominion Energy got a 5-year exemption from being reviewed as a monopoly regulated by the State Corporation Commission. They would not have gotten away with that but for the massive amount of money that they contribute. And that's just corrupting our state. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe our final speaker in proponents is Narissa Turner. Ms. Turner, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Narissa Turner with the Virginia Conservation Network, and we support both SB 45 and SB, oh geez, I've already forgotten the number, but we support both bills, and we thank Senators Stewart and Senator Peterson for putting forward these bills. Thank you.
Okay. Now we'll hear from those in the room. We're going to try and keep it to 3 minutes. The other side went over, but we'll start with 3 minutes. Those in the room who are against the bill, please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, Chris Nolan with McGuire Woods on behalf of Dominion Energy, and it's a pleasure to see everyone again for the third or fourth time on this bill. Dominion Energy is opposed to both bills, Senate Bill 45 and 568. And Senator Peterson is correct. We do not believe that it is appropriate to single out one type of corporation and suppress its political speech, and as a consequence, raising others. Both of these bills go at the heart of political speech and the ability to freely associate those with similar political viewpoints. And I'd like to talk about the bill specifically. We'll start with Senator Peterson's. I just want to make sure you understand what this does. This bill says that for the entities that are covered, whichever those are, you cannot contribute to a referendum committee. So if you wanted to support a state park referendum statewide, no public utility could do that. You cannot contribute to a political action committee. So if you wanted to support the Virginia Chamber of Commerce political action committee, that is prohibited. If you want to establish an employee PAC, because typically what is done is that the corporation establishes the PAC, the employees fund the PAC. This says that's going to be prohibited at the state level, even though that is permitted at the federal level. And moreover, it applies to the holding company. So it's not just the the public utility. It is also the holding company, which may have unregulated assets that now you have said you cannot use the revenue from those for political speech. Now, turning to Senator Stewart's bill, if accountability for Virginia is your issue, this bill does not solve it. Let's be clear. Now, this is drawn to the candidate section of the election code, but yet on line 15, it refers to any committee. Well, if we're talking about candidate committees, we say candidate campaign committees. So this, I think, is intended to be much broader than that. But on line 17, for the purpose of influencing the outcome of an election. Now, that is a key phrase. That used to appear in the Virginia Code. It was there up until 1998 when the Virginia Supreme Court said that phrase is unconstitutionally overbroad, because what does it mean? So what they said was they interpreted that to mean to be expressly advocate for the election or defeat of a clearly identified candidate. That is what is in our code today. Why we are going back for language from 20 years ago that was held unconstitutional, I do not know. But finally, lines 21 through 25. This, I believe for the first time in the election code, gives a citizen, or a registered voter of the Commonwealth, a private right of action to enforce this statute. So they now can file a petition where the campaign committee received the contribution to have this enforced. That is very similar to things that we have read about recently as far as private enforcement. This is the first time that I think we've done that in Virginia's election code.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. We're limited on time, but the others who are here to speak against this bill, please come forward and introduce yourselves.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Morgan Whalen with Virginia Natural Gas. Our read of these bills is both bills would apply to us, and we are opposed.
Thank you.
Katrina Jones-Robleski with Columbia Gas. We are also opposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Scott McCary, Washington Gas. With great respect to the patrons, I rose to speak because of Washington Gas being mentioned. We make no company, no corporate contributions. All of our donations are from a volunteer employee political action committee spending their own money, which we think is important to preserve. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, Ron Jefferson with Appalachian Power Company, and we oppose the bill.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Eric Risen with the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, and we oppose the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any in the virtual world who wanted to speak against the bill?
If you're in the Zoom room and wish to speak in opposition to the bill, please raise your hand virtually now. Mr. Chairman, we have no speakers.
Okay. We have two separate bills, so they'll require two separate motions. Is the committee want to make a motion on one or the other to start? Let's ask, the clerk, can we take these as a block? Okay. So is there, it would be appropriate to move in a block to treat them equally.
Mr. Chair, I'll move to report in a block.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
Mr. Chairman, substitute motion.
Do we need a second to the first motion before it's a substitute? Okay, so you can make a motion, sir.
PBI in block.
Is there a second to that? Second. Okay, so there's been a motion and a second to PBI both bills. We'll vote on the board. Green is to PBI.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Senator Bell votes no.
Okay.
Ayes 11, noes 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Members of the committee.
Thank you for being here. So before we move on to other member bills, we're going to take up the resolutions confirming gubernatorial appointments. The first is Senate Joint Resolution 83, which confirms the agency heads of our new governor. I hope people have had a chance to look at it. I understand that their paperwork has all been received. Is that correct? Okay. So this is for agency heads. Is there a motion to on that resolution?
Mr. Chairman, I had a question.
Senator Surville.
I just had a question. I talked with staff before today. I thought that before we voted these, we were going to get statements of economic interest on all
Yeah,
of them.
that's the paperwork that's been received. Did you,
Do we get to look at it, or?
it's available for inspection. I don't know if a notice was sent out.
How do we look at it?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator, there was an email that went out to all the committee members saying that if you did want some of the information, you can just request either the individuals that you want, or if you wanted all of it, send a thumb drive, and DLS can put all that together for you and get it to you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so on Senate Joint Resolution 83, these are agency heads, not cabinet appointments. Is there a motion?
Second.
Okay, motion and second, so we'll vote, unless there's any discussion, we'll vote on Senate Joint Resolution 83.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ayes 15, no 0.
Okay, now we're at Senate Joint Resolution 84. These are cabinet members, and
Mr. Chair, I've got a motion.
Senator Deeds.
Mr. Chair, I move that we amend Senate Joint Resolution 84 to remove lines 42 and 43.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay. All in favor of the motion to remove lines 42 and 43 will signify by saying aye.
Is there any discussion?
Or, okay, before we vote, is there discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I think public should be allowed to comment, members should be allowed to comment instead
Well,
of
let's
just.
have comments from the members. Did you want to speak, Senator McDougall?
Mr. Chairman, I was not advocating to speak, but I was advocating that the public be allowed to speak and members instead of just pulling off a cabinet secretary with no articulation of why you're pulling them off and moving forward to try to jam that through. I mean, it's clear that the committee is stacked 9-6 in a nonpartisan way. What's going to happen? So at least we ought to have a conversation about it.
We received a letter from 150 former EPA employees who suggested that Mr. Wheeler had undermined the work of the EPA and worked against the environmental interests of this country. We think that members of the governor's cabinet ought to be people that unite us as Virginians, and certainly the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources ought to be one that we have confidence in terms of working for the preservation and conservation of our natural and historic resources. And on this side of the aisle, we just don't have that level of confidence with this nominee.
Is there further discussion among members of the committee?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'm happy to
Senator
throw
Reeves.
toast over toast, but I mean, I can go through Mr. Wheeler's, all the stuff he's done. He completed his law degree at Washington University, and when he served as the administration's EPA principal, all the things that he's done, he gave $225 million in funding for water reuse project to protect the bay, provided $200 million for wastewater infrastructure to reduce runoff and sewage from reaching the bay, provided funding to the Pennsylvania agencies to address agricultural runoff. 2020, the Bay attained the lowest ANOC dead zone in 30 years under seawater grasses and have increased 34,000 to 100,000 acres. Air emissions decreased 7% during the last administration. These reductions were pre-COVID through 2019. I mean, I can go on and on and on. So it's just a difference of opinion, but I think my colleague from Hanover is right. I mean, we can sit and go tit for tat, but we already know what the outcome of this.
Well, Mr. Chair, we can go tit for tat.
Okay, Senator Dietz.
We can go tit for tat, and we can certainly counterpoint every one of your points. I don't recall us having this kind of discussion when your side of the aisle decided to remove Mr. Danny LeBlanc from Governor Kane's cabinet several years ago. The precedent has been set. I would call the question on the motion.
Yeah, and I would just suggest to Senator Reeves that Mr. Wheeler was invited to the Ag and Natural Resources Committee for an interview, and he's met with many of us in our offices, and many of us have received correspondence from both sides. I know my office got more than 500 letters opposing his nomination, and the clerk has forwarded some letters to the contrary to us as well. So I think this has been members of the committee are well informed, and unless there's other committee discussion, there was a motion to.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. So all those in favor of removing lines?
No, it's calling the question. I thought.
All those in favor of calling the question will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? I believe the ayes have it. Now we'll have a vote on whether or not to remove lines 42 and 43. Is that a voice vote, or do we need to record that? Okay, it'll be, the voice vote, a vote in, an aye is to remove lines 40.
Mr. Chairman, we would ask for a recorded vote.
Okay, we will have a recorded vote on whether to remove lines 42 and 43 from the resolution. An aye is to remove those lines.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ayes 9, noes 6.
Okay, the motion carries, and now we are to vote on the resolution as amended. Is there a motion to report SJ 84 confirming the remaining members of the governor's cabinet? Okay, is there a second? Okay, so all in favor of confirming those who remain on resolution 84 will vote aye.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ayes 15, no 0.
Thank you. Okay, we've got one more resolution, which is SJR 85. These are appointees that were made prior to Governor Northam's term ending. They're for members of boards and commissions. And I would entertain a motion to report SJR 85.
So move.
Second, but Mr. Chair, this just is a corrects my misstatement the other day that we'd seen the last Northam resolution. This is another Northam resolution.
Okay, thank you. So all in favor of reporting SJR 85 will signify by voting aye.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ayes 15, no 0.
Okay, we now have several members with bills. I know Senator Chase has been waiting patiently, but I know Senator Locke had asked me earlier about she had somewhere else to go. If you don't mind, I'm going to take her first. Senator Locke's bill is SB 767, and I believe that you had an amendment to that bill.
Yes, I need a line amendment that says that the provisions of the bill are contingent upon voters approving the SJ1 in November.
Okay, okay. So all in favor of the amendment will signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay.
This is a bill that needs to go to finance, is that correct?
This bill does go to finance if reported. Senator Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. SJ 767 is in accord with SJ1, which this committee passed earlier. It accompanies that legislation, the constitutional amendment for the right to vote and voting rights restoration for returning citizens. SJ 767 outlines a process to ensure that individuals released from incarceration are able to register to vote upon their release. The process outlined in the bill was developed in consultation with several stakeholders to understand the process that was in place when Governor Northam left office and to ensure the workability of the provisions of the bill. It defines incarceration, release from incarceration, and provides a process for the Department of Corrections and the State Board of Local and Regional Jails to transmit to the Department of Elections information related to an incarcerated person and their release dates. The bill further directs the Department of Elections to promptly process the information and make all necessary updates in the Virginia voter registration system to permit the formerly incarcerated person to register to vote. And that's the nature of the bill.
So effectively, this is a process bill if the constitutional amendment passes.
Correct.
That would enumerate how that would work. Is there questions or discussion from members of the committee? Okay. Are there people in the room who would like to testify in favor of the bill? Anyone in the room against the bill? Come forward, sir.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Ryan Barlow, and I'd like to speak against this bill. Well, not necessarily against it. I'd like to understand this bill a little better. Is this bill in support of felons?
We don't really do questions and answers, I think the patron explained the bill, and you can talk to her more afterwards, but the bill is, we don't do a Q&A. If you have a position you'd like to express further, feel free.
No further.
Okay, thank you. Are there any in the room, we asked about the room, is there anyone virtually who wants to testify on this bill? Raise your hand.
If you're in the Zoom room and would like to speak in support of this bill, please raise your hand electronically now. Mr. Chairman, we have 2 speakers.
Okay, so the first speaker will be Janet Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The League of Women Voters supports SB 767. We also commend Senator Locke's leadership in support of the constitutional amendment that would create a fundamental right to vote for all citizens in Virginia, 18 and over, who are not currently serving time for a felony conviction. Thank you.
Okay, and now we have Ms. Sheba Williams.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair and Committee. My name is Sheba Williams. I'm the Executive Director of No Left Turns. Back in April of 2021, 69,000 Virginians retained their right to vote who have been citizens and taxpayers in this community. They deserve to be a part of the community and be able to have access to the civil ballot, just as they have access to paying into the community. They should have a voice in who serves them on school boards, committees, and local government. I support this bill wholeheartedly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any virtually to speak in opposition to the bill?
If you are in the Zoom room and wish to speak in opposition to this bill, please raise your hand electronically now. Mr. Chairman, there are no speakers.
Okay. Is there a motion on this bill? Okay, that's SB 767. Is there any further discussion among members of the committee? If not, we'll proceed to vote. The motion is to report and refer to finance. Is that correct? As amended.
Thank you.
Okay, so vote yes if you'd like to report and refer to finance.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ayes 9, no 6.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Now we've got Senator Chase. You'll be next, followed by Senator Suderline with Senator Deeds having similar bills. You have 2 bills?
I do. Would you like to begin? Does it matter which one we start with? I've got Senate Bill 605 calling for a full forensic audit here in Virginia.
Do you want to start with the one we were discussing last week first?
We can do that. Absolutely.
That was 588,
Yes,
about
sir.
the list of registered voters.
Wonderful. Senate Bill 588 is a bill that we initially discussed last week, and just to quickly summarize what Senate Bill 588 does is it basically provides that the Department of Elections provide the list for their districts to any registered voter of the Commonwealth for a reasonable charge, not to exceed its actual cost incurred in supplying the requested records. Everyday average citizens should be able to inspect the voter registration rolls. Many states allow a citizen to submit a FOIA request to get such copy and at no charge.
Okay, and I understand you have an amendment with you today?
I do, and I would like to ask that that amendment be adopted. It's a suggestion made last week by Senator Peake, which would narrow the focus of who can get the list, and it couldn't just be anybody. It has to be folks who are interested in verification of the vote.
Does the clerk have the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. On line 25 of the introduced bill, after Commonwealth, insert for voter registration verification purposes only.
Okay. Do people understand the amendment? Any questions on the amendment? Okay. Is there a motion to pass the amendment? So moved. Second? Is there a second? Second. Okay. All in favor of adopting the amendment will signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Senator, I believe you explained the bill. Is there more, or is that the gist of it?
I think you have the gist of it, unless there are any other questions.
Members, any questions or discussion? Okay. Is there a motion on this bill?
I move the report to amendment.
Yeah, move
There was a motion to report as amended. Was there a second to that motion?
Substitute
Okay.
motion.
There's a substitute motion. What's that?
Move to PBI.
Is there a second to that motion? Okay, so the primary motion now becomes, or the motion becomes whether to PBI the bill. So a aye vote is to PBI.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ayes 9, no 6.
Okay. Senator Chase, you have another bill?
I do. Mr. Chairman, Senate Bill 605 is a call for a full forensic audit here in Virginia, and I do have a handout if I could have some assistance in passing this out to the members. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this bill provides for the conduct of a full forensic audit of an election in a county or city upon the request of certain officials or upon the petition of a group of residents of the locality in question. This bill came to me, Mr. Chairman, as a result of constituents in my district reaching out to me saying that they went to cast their vote on Election Day or prior, and their vote had already been cast. So I began doing some calling and investigation of my own, and I will tell you that as a result of this increased effort, like I've never seen in any other election since I've been in office for 7 years, I've never seen this many people, this many voters to say they went to cast their vote and they couldn't because someone had already cast their vote. And if you remember, this summer when we all met together, I presented to the Senate clerk thousands of registered voters who submitted an affidavit or a notice calling for a full forensic audit because they did not feel that their vote counted. So that's the purpose of this. So it doesn't matter what the party is. We want to make sure that whether you're a Republican, Independent, Democrat, that your vote counts, that your voice matters on Election Day. As I mentioned, this is very different than a risk-limiting audit, which was already conducted in Virginia. And just to give you an example of what a risk-limiting audit looks like in my district, in the county of Amelia, where we have about 13,000 residents, one single vote was chosen to be audited out of 13,000. I just feel like that is not thorough enough to give us an idea of what's going on with our elections. So the purpose of this audit is to determine the accuracy and the legality of the election in question. The bill provides that an audit includes a review of all materials, equipment, and procedures used during any part of the election, including the ballots, the poll books, the voting machines, and the routers. The bill requires that the audit to be open to the public and states that the auditing process may include participation by residents. The results of the audit are to be presented to a jury of local residents who have the power to declare the election valid or invalid. The bill also gives the State Inspector General the power and duty to conduct an audit of the 2020 general election and requires him or her to produce a report of his findings. Mr. Chairman, I also have a couple of amendments that have been provided to the committee.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
Yes, Senator Dees.
So this jury, which is provided for in lines 27 through 29, would have kind of extraordinary powers that have never been granted to a group of citizens before in Virginia. Is that correct?
So our objective and our goal, Senator Deeds, is to provide input by the citizens of Virginia, many who felt in 2020 that their voice did not matter. Now, I haven't
With
finished.
all due respect, Senator,
Yes.
wasn't the day for input Election Day? Wasn't that the day that they had input into the results of that election?
Well, typically, yes, Senator Evans, but the challenge is that when people went to cast their vote, they could not because their
Okay,
vote
and
had
I
already
just
been
want to stop you
counted.
there for just one moment, because you said there were lots of people who couldn't cast their votes in Virginia.
Correct.
And I know this is a little unusual, but I want to ask Mr. Piper if his post-election report that the department does after every election showed that his office, how many complaints they
Chairman,
received.
May I finish my presentation of the
Okay,
bill?
we'll take Mr. Piper afterwards then.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know many of you in this room say, why do we need a full forensic audit? Well, in 2020, many Virginians lost confidence in the election process. Why? As I mentioned earlier, many voters went to cast their vote on Election Day only to find out someone had cast their vote for them. Reports of widespread voting irregularities and discrepancies across the country, including Virginia, after the 2020 presidential election. In Henrico County, Virginia, election officials reportedly discovered thousands of overlooked ballots
If you could just
on a
suspend for a moment, Senator Dees.
Senator Chase, somebody last time said that all these votes were cast for people before they got there. How many complaints were made to local offices, local prosecutors' offices? How many of those cases were prosecuted? We've already got a way to redress that. In our,
Mr. Chairman, if I could finish my report, I'll
Well,
be happy to
I'm trying to
answer
answer the
any
question.
reports.
You raised the point a few times, and if you could just answer that one question, we'll let you
The
continue.
answer is this. A lot of people who went to cast their vote, they don't know where to go to get resolved. They just know they went to cast their vote and they couldn't, so they go to their legislators. They go to...
So they went to you?
Yes, I've had people to come to
And
me
have you
as well.
referred those to the Commonwealth's attorney?
I've asked people for signs of copies of affidavits, and we have submitted those to the Senate clerk. That's
But
what we
not to the
have done.
Commonwealth's attorney?
Not at this point, no.
Thank you. Continue.
In Henrico County, Virginia, election officials reportedly discovered thousands of overlooked ballots on a flash drive. The election watch group Virginia Public Access Project tweeted late Wednesday afternoon that Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger was down by about 1,350 votes following a canvass effort by county officials. Less than an hour later, however, VPAP reported she had jumped considerably ahead of Delegate Freitas, in part of the result of an infusion of over 14,600 previously overlooked ballots found on a Henrico County flash drive. The memory stick had been mislabeled as provisional ballots and once found were counted as regular ballots. The votes on the memory stick determined the outcome of the 7th District congressional race. This mislabeling event raised eyebrows and seemed suspect to many voters as the number of newly discovered ballots flipped a seemingly close race. In Spotsylvania County, a Republican election official on the Spotsylvania Electoral Board refused to certify the election. Another paid Spotsylvania election official noted that the wrong ballots were being distributed to voters. In addition, Mr. Chairman, according to a November 16, 2020 Geller report, there were multiple reversals and proportional vote entries in Virginia on election night after 11 p.m. Huge negative entries, gross irregularities, ballots reported in fractional amounts instead of whole integers. Virginia's election results started coming in shortly after the polls closed on Election Day. There were 378 separate entries or feeds related to Virginia found in the file obtained and shared around the web from the New York Times. The New York Times data feed shows all the entries from the New York Times for the presidential election at a state-by-state level. This data does not include county or precinct level data feeds. One oddity in the file noted immediately is that the results for votes are not in the whole integers. All of the entries have fractional amounts, which makes no sense.
This is the New York Times that you're critiquing, or our state
This
election
is.
system?
One oddity in the file noted immediately is the results for votes are not in the whole integers. All of the entries have fractional amounts, which makes no sense since ballots do not come in fractions in the U.S. Each vote equals one vote. The first 125 entries reported in the New York Times data feed was basically reasonable. The results varied in percentage of votes between presidential candidates and appeared to be random, with most votes going to President Trump. Up through this time, which was 11:03 Eastern, President Trump was leading 52% to Biden's 46%. At this time, 3.3 million of the eventual 4.4 million votes had already been cast, or about 75% of the vote was in. This is when things went off the rail. Here's the key, Mr. Chairman. 8 entries totaling 800,000 votes were removed from the database during this
And
time.
are you talking about Virginia votes, or are you going
Yes.
into national?
I'm talking
800,000 Virginia votes.
Talking about Virginia. Everything I'm talking about is about Virginia.
Senator Deeds.
I think what you're talking about is a problem we fixed last session, and that's that some localities didn't count their early vote earlier. They didn't count them. They didn't even categorize them to count till after 9 o'clock at night. So we didn't get a good result until late that evening. We fixed that for the last election. Is that why your bill is aimed only at 2020, not at 2021?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Evans, I appreciate your comments, but I will elaborate. There are a number of different anomalies that we will see on Election Day, and I appreciate your patience. I know it's a lot of detailed
Well, we have
information.
a whole lot of bills.
Yeah, we have limited time, so I'd ask if
So-
you could wrap up in the next few minutes.
Okay, so we're talking about, we have reversing entries, looking like adjusting entries. In summary, after 11 p.m. on Election Day, nearly 70% of the votes recorded in Virginia went to Biden. This includes hundreds of thousands of negative votes and late votes that all had the same proportion of Biden to Trump. What I want to share with you today is that I have a whole team. If you look at the report in front of you, because I knew we would be limited on time today. If you look at the very back, I want you to look at the very back and the resumes of all the people contributing to this report. Experts have taken a look at the State Board of Election database here in Virginia, and they have found major discrepancies.
So these experts are electrical engineers and private citizens.
If you look to, there is a list of discrepancies which can be presented if you look at the analysis and abstract. There are multiple inconsistencies.
I'm going to ask that you conclude.
There are multiple inconsistencies and data issues with the official data reported by the Virginia Department of Elections. There are multiple data records that have been deleted after the fact from the public record. The statistics of the 2020 election do not comply with internationally recognized signatures consistent with free and fair elections. The data reported by the Virginia Department of Elections amongst multiple official files is not self-consistent and mathematically impossible to be true as reported. In conclusion, we must restore our trust in our election process. Our technology must be kept to very high standards and transparent. Anomalies that happen in both 2020 and 2021 Virginia elections must be fully investigated. Mr. Chairman, I would conclude my remarks by saying we have hours and hours. You were asking for proof. I know we can't do that in here, but I would be open to having a hearing of both the House and the Senate at the appropriate time. I know we've done those in the past.
We could have had proof here today if you wanted to present it, and you presented us with some documents that we'll have to judge. I will ask, before we take testimony from Mr. Piper to come forward, Mr. Piper, your Department of Elections post-election report called the 2020 election the most safe, secure, and successful vote in the history of the state. And I'm wondering if the Republican members of the Board of Elections, as well as the Democrats, signed on to that report.
Mr. Chairman, it's a report presented to the board from the department. However, they did review it and in my estimation, agreed.
And in your opinion, are you aware of people going to vote when their votes are already cast? How many complaints like that did you receive?
I don't have a number on the top of my head. I don't recollect any complaints of that nature, and I certainly haven't seen any affidavits from Senator Chase or any other individuals. Had we received something like that, we certainly would have turned it over to the Attorney General's office.
Thank you. Are there members of the committee who have questions for the sponsor or for anyone else? Okay. Are there people here to testify? We're going to take limited testimony because we spent a bit of time on this so far. Why don't we take 2 minutes for each side? Those who are favoring the bill who are in the room, please come forward to the microphone and introduce yourself and be mindful of the time.
Hi, my name is Teresa Antonio. I'm an election officer from Northern Virginia, and I'm in favor of the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, members of the committee. My name is Ryan. I'm with Integrity Alliance, Virginia. And I'd just like to say this. Article 1, Section 2 states that all powers vested and consequently derived from the people and the magistrates or their trustees and servants, that means you guys, and at all times amenable to them. Furthermore, in the state of Virginia Constitution regulates the regulation of government. It was mentioned about granting a grand jury the power, and in my understanding of the accordance of the Virginia Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, we have that power. Article 1, Section 3, that government is ought to be instituted for the common benefit and protection of the security of the people, nation, community, and all various modes and forms of government that is best of which capable of producing the greatest degree of happiness and safety. How can you guarantee... Okay. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Okay, we have speakers in support virtually. We'll start with John Mills.
John Mills, please unmute and begin your testimony. John Mills, please unmute.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Mills, please tell us how you feel about the bill.
Yeah, hey, so I'm Colonel Retired John Mills, former Director of Cybersecurity Policy Strategy and International Affairs at the Department of Defense. Also spent some time on the National Security Council under 2 administrations. Been a sworn election officer in Virginia a number of times. Also advised and consulted on elections in Bosnia, Iraq, and Taiwan. Also with 400 different counties across the U.S. Elections are very solemn processes. They're sacred for our democracy. Key tenets of an election are transparency, auditability by third parties, and understandability. The Carter Center for Democracy essentially provides the gold standard for the conduct of elections. To be blunt, Virginia does not meet these principles or standards. Virginia is a black box of elections. It is really not understood by election registrar, election officers, or citizens, and they have little to no access to a lot of the data here. This bill provides access to the data by the owners of the process.
Thank you for your testimony. We've elapsed the time that we were going to allow, but I'd like to let the speakers who are online who want to support the bill, please state your name. If you have an organization, you can state that and your position on the bill briefly. Next is, I believe, Heather Mitchell.
Hello, I support this bill, and basically I just want to know why you all look so defensive when we're talking about election integrity. This is for our state and our country, so I would just ask you what the public perception is of that when you act like you don't want to hear what we have to say.
We do want to hear what you have to say, and thank you for saying it. Next is Diana Howard.
Diana Howard, Chair of the Virginia Beach Tea Party, and we should ensure that our election processes are accurate, and we support the bill.
Thank you, ma'am. Jonathan LaRue.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Moreau. I'm in Haymarket. I'm actually one of the principal authors of that paper that is on your desk right now. And I will tell you that one of the things that we were able to find that sat on the official election results webpage for Chris Piper's organization for almost a year until I pointed it out was a discrepancy of 382,000 votes in their official report as to the turnout numbers. There are other outstanding issues that have not been corrected and that have not been addressed. So I am more than happy to come and actually to present these results to you. You can find me. Amanda knows how to get a hold of me. I will happily present those with a number of other experts. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Stephen Quinnen. Stephen Quinnen, if you could unmute yourself, we'd like to hear from you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm Steve Quinnen. I'm here with my wife, Rose. We support this bill. We consider a vote against this bill to be a vote to further corrupt our elections, and senators who repeatedly vote to pass bills by indefinitely evade their responsibility to the people of Virginia and should be removed from office. This happened 10 times last week in this committee, and it is truly offensive behavior by the committee to deal with election integrity by pass by.
Yes, and I would like to compliment Amanda Chase. She's out there. She's a warrior. She's listening to the voice of Virginians. I'm not seeing that in this committee. 10 bills, wonderful election integrity bills were presented to you, and you threw them all out. That is nothing that's acceptable to us. I'm telling you, this fraud is out there, and this issue is not going to go away unless you address this.
Thank you. Thank you for your opinion. Okay, next is Ms. Audrey Mehring.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Audrey. I'm the director of Virginia First Audits, and we wholeheartedly support this bill. We have had people coming to us since November 3rd with descriptions of problems in the central absentee precincts. We have testimony from elections officers with broken chain of custody. We have been doing research and analysis for months now. We're more than happy to present to you and add what we have found to the conversation, but we are highly scrutinizing anyone who wants to pass by on this bill and not give it a chance to go to the floor and have the concerns of the people be voiced and put into the code. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. We're limited on time, but we want to hear the remaining speakers, your name and position on the bill. Becky Little or Lytle?
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm in favor of the bill, and we are obviously fighting to maintain our freedoms that our forefathers died for. I do hope that you will take your oath and vow seriously to represent and legislate fairly in light of the fact that the Democrats announced all over social media you're purposely putting up a wall of resistance. There will be eternal consequences for Virginians and for your souls for that, and that's just a spiritual warning that I've gotten a chance to say. Thank you.
I'm offended by that. We're doing our jobs and we're trying to assess each bill fairly. Next up is Brian Perkins.
My name is Brian Perkins. I am retired military and an election officer of Virginia Beach. And I think that you can't find problems if you don't look for them. And audits are integral and important to all facets of government. I support this bill.
Thank you. Patricia Marseglia.
Hello, Senator Evans. It's nice to see you. Senator Evans, I was terrified by what happened to me at Walter Reed Precinct. There was a man who was heavily armed with a rope around the area, and he was a Chinese student there, videotaping absolutely everything. It was heavy duty psychological intimidation that happened to me at that Walter Reed Precinct, and I consider it treason to not support this bill.
Thank you for your testimony, and I'm sorry for your experience. Next, we have Mr. Randall Wenger.
Yes, I'm a citizen, and I've gotten involved in politics because of 2020 and 2021. My question to the Democrats that are on this committee is, what are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of transparency and accountability? Are you afraid you're going to lose? Because you just did last year, and I'd support an audit of 2021 as well.
Thank you for your testimony. Okay, are there any speakers on virtually who are against this bill? Raise your hands virtually.
Mr. Chairman, we have a couple of speakers, starting with Stephen Spitz.
Okay, we ask you to keep your testimony fairly brief, but please tell us your name and why you're against the bill, or if you're against the bill.
Yes. Yeah, I'll be very brief. There were over 60 lawsuits presented about the 2020 election, and they were all rejected by judges. I am not aware, and I have been for many years the co-chair of the Election Law and Voter Protection Committee of the Fairfax County Democratic Committee. I'm not aware of any lawsuit raising any of the claims Senator Chase has raising in 2022 about the 2020 election. Let's move on. There is, if there were serious problems in the 2020 election, there would have been a lawsuit about this, and a judge is going to rule on it. And this is idiotic for us to be focusing on the 2020 election in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Kelly Price is the next speaker.
Hi. Yes, I oppose this bill. I think that saying that there's problems doesn't make them problems. And I feel like all of the voters that I have talked to do believe we do have integrity. And don't worry, we'll still campaign for all of you guys that pass this bill by. And I also say that Senator Chase last week, when she testified about this, said she did take some bills to the state attorney. Today she's saying she didn't.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Lisa Gerchik.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Gerchik with the League of Women Voters of Virginia. The League strenuously opposes SB 605, which provides for so-called forensic audits of elections. This type of review of elections is not subject to any accepted norms of post-election audits. It allows a jury of randomly selected local residents to invalidate elections. The bill also calls for the Inspector General to conduct an audit of the 2020 election. There is no dispute about the outcome of the 2020 election in Virginia, and it was subject to a successful risk-limiting audit that confirmed the results. This bill would undermine the integrity of elections in Virginia. We urge you to reject it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we've heard the speakers, we've heard about the bill. I don't know if members of the committee have a motion or other questions.
Mr. Chairman, could I just conclude my remarks?
Very briefly, if you could.
I'd simply say this. A lot of people said, Amanda, show me the fraud. And I say, give me a full forensic audit and I'll show you the fraud.
So you
Thank
don't
you.
have the fraud to show us today?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Okay, yes, Senator Boysko.
For all the people who are watching this, I just want to make sure that they understand that there is a process that they can go to the elections, Department of Elections, and file a complaint if you feel that you have been disenfranchised in any way. Again, there is a right to appeal. There are all formal ways that, unfortunately, you're not providing any data that says that these people have made actual complaints to the Department of Elections. I would encourage them in the future, if they feel that they've been disenfranchised, to do that. And they would go to elections.virginia.gov/voter-complaints. And that way people can file theirs in a timely manner within 10 days to allow an actual record to be made public. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, and to answer Senator Boysko, we have directed everyone about the correct process in place whenever they are trying to express their situation where they feel like their vote did not count. We have done our due diligence. The challenge we have right now is that we have people approaching their legislators saying, collectively, thousands of people, we, the General Assembly, who represent the people who elect us, have a fiduciary responsibility when we have this many people who feel disenfranchised to at least have some type of hearing that's more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes, to give these people an opportunity to share with us what they have experienced and what they have heard. And a simple, informal paper, people don't trust the process. They don't feel like their voice is being heard. And that's why I'm bringing forward this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I think we've had a discussion that you've made your case, but I would say that when public officials so distrust in elections, that adds to the perception. I would ask that, if you find any proof, if you find anyone who says their vote was not counted, they should contact the Department of Elections or their Commonwealth's attorney. Okay, is there a motion on the bill? Who's waiting to speak? Oh, Senator Peake?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Senator Peake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a pretty good idea of how this vote's going to go. But I would just say to this committee and members of the General Assembly, we do have a problem about how the public perceives our elections. And as elected officials, we have a responsibility to address this problem. It's probably not this bill, but there were several bills that we killed last week to make sure that the public has confidence in our election process, and that's protecting the absentee ballot process and voter registration and photo ID. So I know certainly on the other side of the aisle there's a lot of skepticism, and we know since it was 2020 that started the election concern. Whether you believe it or don't believe it is kind of irrelevant in the Commonwealth at this point because so many of our citizens do believe it. And so whatever we can do as a body to take those steps to make sure that absentee ballots can't be compromised, that they can't be harvested, that they can't be copied and submitted, that we don't have drop boxes. Those are things that we need to do so that citizens of the Commonwealth will trust our elections.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, is there a motion or further discussion?
Could I ask Senator Peake a question?
Certainly. Yes, Senator Deeds.
Yes. Senator Peake, down on lines 30 and 31, it addresses cost. The cost is going to be borne by the locality. This is an unfunded mandate. Are you prepared to vote for that? No, I want a yes or no.
No, Mr. Chairman, I can answer the question. It's not.
No, it's a yes or
It's
no
not
answer.
an unfunded
Yes, it
mandate.
is.
It is not, because I built in a budget amendment that would cover the cost.
It's a budget amendment. To answer the senator, I mean, elections are one of the most important things the Commonwealth does. And I think the money from the Commonwealth to cover this audit or to cover the procedures we talked about, the ballots last week, to cover the cost of making sure that our elections are secure. We talked about how much money was spent on our elections, how much was spent on the governor's election in the Commonwealth, how much was spent on senators' elections, delegate elections. It dwarfs what it would cost the Commonwealth to guarantee the security of our elections here.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Is there a motion on the bill? There's a motion and a second. Is there any other substitute motion? Is there a second? Okay, so the motion that we'll vote on first is to PBI. A vote yes is to PBI the bill.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ayes 9, no 6.
Okay, thank you. Next, Senator Sudalan has been patiently waiting, and he and Senator Deeds have similar legislation, so I'm going to ask them to present it together so the committee can decide if they choose one of theirs as a vehicle unless they want to roll it together.
So, would you like me to start with that bill?
That would be fine.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, congratulations on being chairman. I think it's the first time I've presented as you've been chairman. But this is a bill you've heard before. It's one that we have passed through the Senate on a bipartisan basis twice, and I'm hoping that we do a third time. It's Senate Bill 3. This bill is incredibly important. That's why I've been hammering on it the last 2 years. It's why I filed it so early. It was important that we have this out there early. I think a lot of the discussions you just heard on the previous bill highlight why this bill is so important. Because of the large number of folks that vote early or by absentee at historically high levels, and I have a feeling that's likely going to continue, when those results of those precincts, central absentee precincts, are reported as one rather than by the individual precincts, it creates something that both academics, campaign operatives, all of us that are familiar with it refer to as election mirages. Election night mirages are ones that can very much trick people who might have been very familiar with elections for a long time. I tell the story in Roanoke City, which just across the border, Senator Edwards lives. There was a mayor's election, and if you were watching that election and you were at all familiar with previous election results, it would have appeared that the challenger was going to win that election. He had not only won several of the swing areas and the historically Republican areas, he was winning Democratic precincts on election night. And all that was left was one precinct to report, and he had a substantial lead. And I had several people texting me and calling me and saying, I can't believe the incumbent mayor is going to get defeated like this. And I told them, because I was familiar with what was happening on the central absentee, I said, let me tell you, less than half the votes in, and I assure you the incumbent is going to carry that central absentee. And he did. And, those folks I was able to tell that to, they understood it. But I still meet other people throughout the Valley that say, I don't believe that election was legitimate. Well, I can tell you as someone that watches Roanoke Valley elections, I'm very confident it was legitimate, but I completely understand why these people who had previously watched them but were not familiar with the new phenomenon of such significant early vote and it all being recorded by central absentee. So that happened then. We also had that happen on the 2020 presidential election, which was incidentally that same night.
Why don't y'all let Donald Trump die? Please.
Well, yeah, he and Mr. Biden had a lot of folks very excited about the election, and folks were watching. And one of the crazy findings that was most unusual was if we looked at in the chairman's home city of Alexandria, one of the precincts that we would not anticipate, and I'm sure through all his door knocking, and he knows those voters well, they are not likely to vote for a Republican presidential candidate. But not only did the Trump-Pence ticket carry that precinct, they did better than Reagan in the '84 landslide. And there was nothing to suggest that was happening. But when you go look at the actual results, you see there's not that many, the turnout in that precinct was not as high as one would anticipate, but you go look at the absentee and there were so many there. So it's incredibly important that we get these precincts, the absentees recorded by their precinct. One, because it will help restore more confidence in the election results. We will reduce the number of folks who, you can't cure everything, but I mean, the legitimate critiques, it will make it clear that those are election night mirages, just like those of us that are so engaged know. And also...
Yeah, would you yield for a question from Senator Sproul?
Oh, certainly.
A precinct in one of my elections that I was down and one of the precincts was out. Knowing the precinct that favored me, I knew I was going to win. Not by how much, because I was down 500 votes. But that's a large precinct, and it was a heavy Democratic precinct. I just had faith because that was a Democratic precinct, I was going to win. So I'm just trying to see what you're getting at. And so I'm trying to see, it was counted that night, so it could have shocked me had I lost because of that precinct, because it was a heavy favorite Democratic precinct, and I was down. So what's so surprised? And the second thing, Mr. Chairman, that I seen the favorite spiel here because I had marked it, yes. When the hell y'all gonna let Donald Trump die and stop bringing him up? Please.
So I think that it's very important that we have as much confidence in the election as we can. This is something that I've had so many conversations with so many of you, both at the Science Museum and here, that I think we can do it. Something that, even if a secondary reason I think this is important, is we need to know what the election results are in different areas. I think that's something that the most valuable poll any of us has is our election day poll. And if we, as an elected official or a member of city council, recognize that the vote is substantially different in one portion of the community we represent, we know that there's something that we need to look into there, and that's where we need to give more attention. And I think if that were the only benefit of it, that in itself would be enough. But what made me want to carry this bill, necessitated it in my mind, and why you've heard so much about it from me for the last 2 years, was because of election night mirages like the one I told you about in our mayor's election.
Thank you, Senator Suderline. Before I ask Senator Deeds to present, I just want to point out a difference between your bill and his and tell you that even though I voted against yours in the past, I'm coming around to this concept. I'm concerned about implementation, and your bill on line 28 says that the absentee ballots shall be sorted by precinct to which the voter who casts the absentee ballot is assigned. And I just wanted to point out that in some larger localities, like Fairfax County, I believe, has more than 200 precincts, so it will require hundreds of thousands of ballots in a presidential election to be hand-sorted. Whereas in Senator Deeds' bill, and I'll let him speak to his bill, I believe it allows for a unique code on the ballot as to which precinct the ballot's with, so that the ballots would be reported by precinct, but not necessarily physically sorted, which would allow for quicker reporting of results. And I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Mr. Chair, you identified the key difference between Suderline's bill and my bill, 306. On lines 119 through 122 of my bill, it allows the department to include in the word voting system this on-demand ballot system, ballot marking devices used to manufacture or mark ballots to be cast. And lines 124 through 130 requires the ballots to be provided to the department by precinct, the absentee ballots, but allows the department to develop the standards for ascertaining and reporting the information. It just builds in more flexibility. I'm afraid that the process defined by the good senator's bill would require an even later reporting, and that would slow down the results.
Senator Suderline, do you care to comment about if you would want to roll into his, or if you prefer your vehicle or language, or how you want to handle that?
And I'm open to suggestions on the language. I mean, I'd like to carry the bill because I've been carrying it for 3 years. But I mean, generally, I don't care about that. But I've been talking about this so much that I want to be able to go back and actually show folks that this is what we did. And if you think there's a better way to get to that point, I'm happy. But this is your committee, Mr.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Sutherland. If we take my language and put your number on it, so it's your bill, will you commit to keep the language that we've got?
I'm happy. I can't commit to what anyone else will do, but I'm happy to take the language. And I'm also, let me just say, my objective is to get the results on election night right. And that's it. And so I think you trust me to tell you that that's what I'll do. If the House or the governor or the Senate floor says, hey, you ought to do this, but no, I do not intend to take your language and then get over to the House and say, hey, I want you to put back my
Your
language.
intent is to work for the language in that Senator
I
Deeds
intend to
put
work with Senator Deeds and everyone else.
I do have one question for Senator Deeds about his language. On line 126 and 127, it says results from absentee voting and voting at precinct on election day shall be reported separately, except when it is necessary to preserve the secrecy of the ballot. And that phrase is a little troubling to me. I know that in my first primary, there was one precinct where 10 people voted, and they all voted against me, so I kind of knew that the woman who I was campaigning hard with there didn't vote for me. And that's just the way the ball bounces. And I had another primary where there were 3 votes cast in one precinct. I got 1, and each of my opponents got 1. So I'm wondering if that phrase is necessary, or if you care to comment on it. Because the early voting is heavy enough now that it's unlikely to be a constant.
I don't, I mean, if staff, well, do you remember where that language came from, Brooks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Deeds, there is a constitutional requirement to preserve the secrecy of the ballot, and so there was some concern that if you did have a situation where there was only one voter who voted absentee and you reported those results, then you would have that voter's entire ballot. So that was the concern, was just to avoid that type of situation where there's a small number of votes, 1 or 2, where it would expose an individual voter's vote.
I'll leave it to Senator Deeds and Sutherland. I just wanted to raise that concern. I'm going to vote for it either way.
Mr. Chair.
Chair.
First Senator McClellan and then Senator Sproul.
I guess, but, so as I read this language, that could be an issue based on a small number of people voting absentee, but it also could be an issue if you have a small number of people voting on election day, and yet we don't require that language for reporting by precinct on election day.
That was my point, is that I can tell how people voted in those rare circumstances. It's pretty rare, though.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I know that's the case. A lot of us were unaware that there was a very small number of households in the landmass surrounded by the city of Radford that was still in Montgomery County, and it was irrelevant because Radford and Montgomery County were always in a district together until the Senate district that Senator Puckett, Senator Chafin, and now Senator Hackworth represents, in which there are 3 people that are inside the city of Radford but are actually in Montgomery County, and so we find out how they vote every time. And Senator Norman has 1 voter in one of his counties that he gets to know if that person voted for him or not. So, I mean, that's the same thing that Sarah McClellan said. It's already happening in those other places. So,
If that's the case, why don't we take that language out of the bill for now? And if we need to put it back in, we can put it back in.
Okay, so on lines 126 and 127, is there a motion to strike the language except when it is necessary to preserve the secrecy of the ballot? Okay, there's a motion and a second. I don't believe that language appears elsewhere in the bill.
It doesn't.
So that's the only place. So all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye. And we're going to.
Any opposed?
We're going to incorporate this bill into Senator.
Yeah, that's our next
bill.
motion. So
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Sproul.
So if I ask you a question and you give a political answer, and I'm scared of when you give a political answer, pressure from you. Now, my question is that Senator Deeds has says that use his language and give you the number. And so my question, but you keep saying what happened to the other ballot. I'm concerned with the other ballot. I'm concerned that if we take his language and put it in your bill and give you the head number, will you support that? That's my question.
Yes.
Okay. So is there a motion to roll SB 306 into SB 367 using the language that
No,
we just...
SB
No,
3.
3.
SB 3.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's 3. That's your other bill. Okay. SB 306 into SB 3 using the language of SB 306 as we just amended.
So moved.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. So is that a recorded vote or?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so all those in favor vote aye.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Okay.
That's 15-0.
Before we hear motions on the bill, is there anyone in the public who feels compelled to speak for this bill? Anyone who feels compelled to speak against this bill? Or come forward, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Barbara Tabb. I'm with the Electoral Board Association. I want to thank you for amending the bill this way. We are in support of this bill as long as the phrase that we had to physically separate the ballots was removed. We're very much in support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tabb. Sir?
Hello, Mr. Chair. My name is Joshua Pratt. I'm with Virginians for America First, and we do support this bill. We support this bill in that the CAP is very difficult to man and to have watchers look over this cap. Also, too, we talked about election night results. The cap is open for 45 days. Those ballots can be counted up through that entire process. So saying that they are counted the day of the election is unreasonable, since the discretion of the registrars is to count those ballots at any time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. You're for the bill?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there anyone virtually who feels compelled to testify? I guess we do have some speakers. If you could be brief and tell us if you favor the bill, why, or in your name.
Diana Howard, please unmute and begin your testimony.
Diana Howard of Virginia Beach Tea Party. We support the bill. One of the things they didn't mention, if you have it by precinct, it lets you know what areas you need to concentrate on. You know, if you're running for an election or you're working for a person that's running for an election. So it does help you in that endeavor.
Okay, our next speaker is, who's next?
Jonathan LaRoe, please unmute and begin your testimony.
Hello, Jonathan LaRoe again. I also support this bill. I think it's very important that we actually get the results propagated back to the precincts that they originated from. That helps for a number of reasons, for making sure that we can actually get accurate statistics, but it also helps for things like redistricting, et cetera, and all the reasons that were previously stated. So I support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess we've got others, Dr. Clara Wheeler.
Clara Wheeler, you can unmute and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Mayor.
Ms. Wheeler, you are muted.
Thank you, Madam. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to speak. This bill has been around a long time, and it is a very good and worthy bill that now has bipartisan support with bipartisan patronage. I would comment that the software is already available on our optical scan equipment. It's available to be loaded. Some localities already have it, that will allow the optical scans to count by precinct. It requires that the ballots have a specific barcode, which can be put on the ballot so that the scanner will automatically sort without hand touching or hand counting. I would also tell you that this is important because it's important to give you people who are running for office and the voters an ability to know how each precinct votes, because as you have heard earlier, we have more and more people voting absentee in the mailed back or in the central absent or in the in-person absentee. I would caution everyone to remember that this is a matter of education, so that the officers of elections who are handing out ballots and the registrar's offices who are distributing mailed out ballots give the voter the right ballot.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Nix? James Nix?
Mr. Chair, thanks for an opportunity to speak. I just wanted to support what my VIBA colleague Barbara Tabb said. The VIBA is completely supportive of the voting, counting absentee by precinct. In fact, this was actually done in last year's election in at least 5 Virginia localities, remarkably including Fairfax County. So we've certainly demonstrated that it's feasible. It's not cost-free, but it's feasible. And say one more thing about the physical separation, which apparently has been removed from this bill, but I wanted to say that our objection to that is even stronger than was stated earlier, because in the case of voting early in person, it's physically impossible to separate those ballots. I mean, the separate precinct ballots all go into the same scanner, and they're counted by precinct, but then they drop into a common ballot box. And there really is no way, once that's happened, to separate them again. And frankly, no reason to do so, because the votes will be recorded by precinct. So we're fully supportive of the reworded bill.
Thank you. I think we resolved that issue. We have a speaker in opposition, Ms. Allison Robbins.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not speaking in opposition. I raised my hand to speak for Allison Robbins, Director of Elections and General Registrar for the County of Wise, and I represent the Voter Registrars Association. We support the inclusion of Senator Deeds' language into Senate Bill 3, and we look forward to working with the Department of Elections to ensure that the bill is administratively possible. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there's a motion, it needs to be to report and refer to finance. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Second. Been moved and seconded. All in favor of reporting and referring SB 3, the Suderland Bill SB 3 with the other language, vote aye.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Suderland, praise the Lord.
There you go.
Aye.
Oh, I got to vote Howell. Okay. Thank you.
Ayes 15, no 0.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I feel like Senator Pillion in the House.
Okay, Senator Suderland, Senator Deeds needs to leave. Can we take his other bill up and then we'll come right back to you? Okay.
I've got to run and present some other bills in another committee. I've got Senate Bill 698. In December, somebody from Charlottesville showed me a copy of their voter file information that had been published on the internet. So I don't think that's legal, but Senate Bill 698 is a simple bill. The language on 47 through 49 just clarifies that anyone who has access to the voter file cannot publish it on the internet. An organization that did publish online, interprets the law as that being not an allowable use of under the law, but there's really no remedy. And so this language...
It seems pretty straightforward.
Mr. Chairman.
Are there questions from Senator Surville?
Yeah, there are questions from Surville. I thought Senator Peterson had this bill in our first meeting that we PBI'd. How's this different?
This bill has to do with publishing the list on the internet. Senator Peterson's bill, I believe, had to do with using it in promotional campaigns through the Postal Service or otherwise.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Is there other questions from a member of the committee?
Mr. Chairman, move the report.
Okay, there's a motion, a second report. Before we do that, is there anyone in the public who feels compelled to slow down this train?
Move the report.
Second.
If I think there's someone who would like to speak. So come forward, please, and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Nancy Smith. I'm with Middle Resolution PAC. I would urge the committee to go back and review a lawsuit from 2010 by the name of the No Campaign, KNOW, versus Nancy Rodriguez. That case, and perhaps Senator Spruill is familiar with it, that case held that the voter file was public information, and the plaintiff did win in that case. That an individual or an organization cannot be refused public information, that a select group of individuals, be it a political party, candidates, or certain organizations like PACs cannot restrict that information and not allow the average citizen to access that. So the plaintiff did win that case, and so there is some precedent in Virginia. 3 years later, the Attorney General's office came forward to, I believe it was House P&E, urging House P&E to acknowledge that and to codify that public information is public and should be available to citizens of Virginia. He indicated that the AG's office would not pursue another lawsuit, having lost that one, and he urged the committee to take action. So I'm here to speak not about the public information that is being put on the internet. Of course, things have changed since 2010 and 2013, but the public information is public and citizens ought to have access to that information. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there others who would like to speak on this bill?
If you're in the Zoom room and you would like to speak in regards to this bill, please raise your hand electronically now. Mr. Chairman, there are no virtual speakers.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I vaguely remember that the Rodriguez litigation, but I can't speak to that case. I know that under the code, we've restricted access to the voter file to certain groups, and all this bill says is that to the groups that have access to that information, they can't publish it on the internet. We've also said that certain people's addresses, even though they're in the voter file, they're not public information. For example, people who are victims of domestic violence. This simply, the aim of this is to prevent people from being harassed because the information they use when they register to vote has been published.
Will you report, Mr. Chairman?
Okay, there's a motion to report. Is there a second? Okay, all in favor of reporting this bill, SB 698, please signify by voting aye.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Oh, wait, okay.
Ayes 15, no zero.
Okay, the bill reports. Now, I believe Senator Suderland had one more bill.
I have two more bills. I'm happy to take one of them by for the week if that helps you out. I mean, it makes no difference to me. There's one bill I'd like to do today, if possible, and that's specifically Senate Bill 67.
Let's go ahead with that.
So Senate Bill 67 requires that political action committees file reports when they spend more than $1,000 between October 1 and Election Day. This is something that it's not something I thought about before, but it showed why it was needed after this last election, in which there was a significant state PAC spending tens of thousands of dollars in the gubernatorial election, and they would not say if they were spending any more. It was Dominion Energy's PAC. It was a big news story, and where the money they were spending was being used to try to discourage voter participation in my part of the Commonwealth. And a lot of people would have liked to know if they were continuing to spend money or not, and no one got to know until after the gubernatorial inauguration. So money that was spent on October 1 through Election Day by a PAC is not actually known to the public unless the PAC chooses to disclose it until after Election Day. We as candidates are familiar with our reporting requirement that after our last report, if someone gives us more than $1,000, we have to report it. I believe that a PAC spending that much money should also be known by the voters before the election rather than after the governor's inaugurated.
Okay, so just to be clear, a PAC that makes a contribution on September 30th, that is reported in a report that's received before the election?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. It'd be October 15th unless that falls on the weekend.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Surville.
So I understand that contributions received during a period of time have to be over a certain amount during a certain time frame are reported because there's not time to see them on a report, and that makes total sense to me. But I mean, if a PAC spends money on communications during this time frame, their name goes on the authority line, on the TV ad, or on the printed material. So, I mean, how is that not an adequate disclosure of who is spending the money?
Mr. Chairman, because the situation that I described, that PAC sent the money to another organization that did not also, it was an out-of-state organization. So they didn't have to report with us, and they didn't have to report with the other entity until after the governor was inaugurated as well. So that way, we did not know. We knew, but it wasn't reported until after the gubernatorial election. So even though approximately another 50, my mind's been too scrambled by the other things, about $50,000 thereabouts was spent, we did not get to have verification or know that. It was all just in the ether because it went through another entity.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Senator Sturville?
I mean, I appreciate what you're trying to get at. It just seems to me it's a kind of obtuse way of doing it because, I mean, any single expenditure over $1,000, I mean, some PAC might spend, $1,500 on a party. I mean, right, or on a restaurant tab or something like that. I mean, so, every single expenditure to require disclosure of every single expenditure over $1,000 between October 1 and November 1, it just seems to me you're kind of hitting the nail with a sledgehammer. Does that make sense?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I welcome suggestions. This was the best way and still the best way until someone's articulated something different to do it.
Wait, we've got Senator Sproul first, and then we'll come to Senator Peake.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the question is, November the 2nd, Scott Survey PAC sends me $5,000. So, and they're going to source, they'll find out about it after the election. So what you hope to accomplish? What is going to change? He could have sent it to me on September 30th. It's still going to be reported after reporting time. He could send it to me October 5th. His PAC sent me $5,000, and it's not reported still after the election. So what do you hope to accomplish by doing that, sir?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Sproul, so Sproul for the Sproul campaign would have to report that $5,000 in that scenario.
Right.
The situation is if the Serval PAC, instead of giving to Sproul for Senate or whatever the entity that runs your campaign legally is if the Serval PAC gave to another entity that then was hoping to perhaps criticize your opponent and it not be tied to you or get tied to him, but it's getting tied to a PAC that's based in Washington, D.C., and they don't have to report till after the election.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator
That's not what your bill is saying. That's not what the bill is saying. It's just October the 3rd, a PAC, Jan or some point, after October the 1st, they give me $5,000. Now, I got reported because I got it reported that the Scott, Jennifer McCullough PAC gave me $5,000. I got it reported because you're going to know about it.
Yeah.
So they know where I got it from, his PAC, that PAC. So.
Well, Senator Sproul?
Yes, sir.
If I could perhaps be of some help, I think what this would get at would be, say there's a pro-Second Amendment PAC or a pro-gun safety PAC.
Okay.
And they want to send out a mailing to 100,000 Virginians saying to vote for Senator Sproul or to vote against Senator Sproul. Because it's not a direct contribution to Senator Sproul, no one would know until after the election that they spent significant money. And what Senator Suderline's getting at is he'd like, if they're spending significant money on the election, that to be more transparent.
Mr. Chairman, to you, okay, so if that's the case, then some PAC send out a mailing for me, some PAC, and he would know who, and he would know who, let's say he does know who it is. So, are you going to punish him? Are you going to send him a fine? You can put him in jail? Okay, they did. They sent out a mail and don't know who it is. A PAC sent a mail for 100,000 votes. So what's going to happen?
Senator, it just is the same kind of public disclosure. We have a transparency is what he's getting at, but whether or not you want that transparency is up to you and how you vote.
Thank you.
Okay, now I believe Senator Peake had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And patron, It seems to me, so $1,000, it makes sense when you're talking about a donation directly to a candidate. But a PAC is not going to spend $1,000. They're not going to get $1,000 of a TV ad or a radio ad. For the most part, if they do, it's not going to make that much difference. Would the patron object to amending this to $10,000?
Mr. Chairman, I would prefer, if it's going to be played with, to be 5,000, and the reason is because I'm running the math of how much it costs to mail in one of our state senate campaigns, and you can mail my district for under $10,000.
That's out in the country. I don't live in the country.
Okay, wait,
it's the same. It's the same.
Let's keep it through the chair. Okay, I think Senator McClellan had a comment.
Mr. Chairman, I
Senator Peake wanted to continue.
I would make an amendment to increase it to $5,000.
Okay, so there's been a motion and a second to amend line 15 to strike the 1,000 to make it 5,000. Is there comment on that before we vote?
Mr. Chairman, can I just suggest something?
Yes.
That if you were going to make it 5,000, I would say instead of any single expenditure, say, and I trust council could do this better, but say to report $5,000 an aggregate amount.
In any one race.
Well,
or one campaign.
Or just, $5,000. Yes, I trust council to.
That would mean if they paid their rent and their catering and something else, that if it added up to 5,000, you want that broken down?
Well, I just don't want them to say, so on the 5,000, again, why we didn't want 10,000, they say, well, we paid the postage directly, and then we paid the mail house for this, and then we paid the designer that. And now I've again taken the mail piece below $5,000, any reportable contribution.
Okay. Senator Peake, do you want to amend your amendment, or is that, what's your preference?
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it would be to spend $5,000 during that time frame on any one campaign. And that would include whatever they spent on that campaign, whether they held a fundraiser or not a fundraiser, they held a luncheon, then they did a mail-in, and then they sponsored some calls if they did it in one particular campaign.
Brooks, is there a way that you would word that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Peake, we could do something along the lines of any expenditures in aggregate that expressly advocate for or against a particular candidate. That would leave out electioneering communications, but at least it would hit those direct advocacy communications.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing about is if it's expressly, so that the advertisement I'm talking about, that there was all that money being spent, that was, what they would say is that they were just giving it to another entity.
Mr. Chair. Wait, before we continue, I want to ask Senator Boysko and Senator McClellan if they wanted to address this amendment or another topic.
Well, it's related to the amendment, but it's really on the underlying bill. But depending on how the amendment is written, here's my question. It sounds like you're not, the way this is written where it says any single expenditure, this is kind of going along Senator Sarabel's point. That's payroll, that's rent, that's parking fees. And it doesn't sound like that's what you're getting at. What it sounds like is you're getting at either direct or indirect contributions to a candidate or another PAC. And I guess I'm getting stuck on the any single expenditure because between October 1st and November, that's going to be at least 2 payrolls. That's going to be at least 2 rent payments, parking fees, like just the general overhead to run an organization. And why do we need that to be reported within 24 hours?
Well, Senator, could I suggest, and I don't want to rewrite this, spend too much time rewriting this bill, but it could say for the purposes of influencing voting, this may be something that if we come to a consensus that the senator might want to come by next week. Senator Boyce, could you have something this topic before we get Senator Reeves?
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Chair. I I mean, we're going to have to disclose this stuff at some point anyway, correct? These are all
Yes.
so whether it's on October or if it's in January, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Well, Mr. Chair.
I've got Senator Reeves in the queue, but Senator McClellan, last comment before we go to Senator Reeves.
Within reason, but again, this is going to apply to every political action committee. And some political action committees are very large organizations that have regular expenditures to run the organization. And those very large organizations, basically you're creating a whole lot more work for a compliance consultant. And trying to logistically get every single expenditure reported within 24 hours, whether it's $1,000 or $5,000, especially if it's aggregated, like I feel like we need to carve out the issues that the expenditures you're really worried about, and not the general overhead of running that organization.
So, thank you, Senator. Senator Reeves, were you waiting to comment?
I was on the motion. I thought I had some language, but I'd be curious to see what
Well, I was talking to Senator Vogel, and I was just wondering, besides saying for the purposes of influencing voting or an election, wouldn't it make sense to change the reporting schedule so that right now they're only reporting through the election what they did through September 30th, is what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Wouldn't it be easier to say that there was a report of what they did through October 30th or something that comes up, or maybe that's too close to the election, but that's one way you could get at this.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the issue is anything between October 1 and the election we don't find out about until after the inauguration.
Do you feel like you have enough to stew on to come up with a substitute for next week, or did you you have a simple solution for right now?
I'm happy to come back next week.
Okay. We appreciate that.
And I'm sure that I might be able to run into an elections attorney that might be able to help me. She's very kind.
Did you want to take your other bill by for the week, or did you want, because we have a
I'll
number.
take it by for the week. I'll be coming back anyways.
I appreciate that.
And
'Cause we have
I'll
another number
let
of
you all
bills.
move along.
We have a number of bills from members that have to go to finance, and they might want to get those sooner rather than later. So appreciate you taking these two by for the week.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to your predecessor's chair, Senator Deeds, who was so helpful and kind today, and all you for your help. Thank you.
Okay. Now we have members of the committee. I know Senator Bell is in Zoom land with a bill, and we have members, McClellan and Vogel have bills as well. Senator Bell, are you still with us?
I am. I'm here.
Okay. You have two bills? Is that right?
I do. If you wouldn't mind, let's take up the one on the campaign, personal use of campaign funds, which is SB 463. We heard that last meeting, and we took it by so we could work on it a bit. And first, asked to move the substitute on that.
So there's a motion. Is there a second? Second on the substitute. All in favor of adopting a substitute, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now is the substitute loaded online now? Brooks? Yes. Okay. So do you want to describe the substitute and how it differed from last week's bill?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I want to thank the members of the committee. I think we had a really worthwhile discussion on this at the last meeting. And this is a bill, obviously, we've seen various versions of it over the years, and it's complicated. It's a complicated subject. So what I got from the last meeting was that there are some things that we can agree on that would be kind of the low-hanging fruit where campaign expenditures shouldn't be applied for personal use, tuition, paying a mortgage, things like that. And then there's other things which were more gray areas. To name two specific ones we discussed was food items. If you have a piece of pizza with your campaign staff, is that illegal? Or a campaign T-shirt. And obviously clothing is needs are different between female and male candidates, so that's very complicated. So what I did is I deleted those two items and just kept it to the things I think there was agreement that were the most egregious. And then was also an issue at the very end of the bill where we were adopting the FEC language and trying to go from there. That started, I believe, in lines 506. So I've deleted that whole paragraph. 506 to 512 is where it was before. So instead of trying to piggyback on the federal election rules, which there was some disagreement with that, I've kept it to just what is here in Virginia and to the most egregious things. I will tell the committee straight out, this is not attempting to be a cure-all perfect bill. It is an attempt to move the ball forward and to focus on the most egregious things that hopefully we can agree on. The things that were in there before, for instance, child care expenses remain. I didn't touch that area. I just got rid of the problematic areas where I think there's debate and I can understand the disagreements. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions. But again, this is a scale down to try to get progress on an area where we haven't had progress on.
Okay. Are there members of the committee with questions for Senator Bell on the substitute? Okay, we're going to just slow down a bit while we're reading it. Are there, if there's no, we could take public testimony in the interim and come back to the committee. Are there anyone in the room who would like to speak for this bill? Anyone in the room who would like to speak against the bill? Okay, in the virtual world, are there those who would like to express support or opposition to the bill? We've got one speaker in support so far, Nancy Morgan. Ms. Morgan, if you could introduce yourself and tell us your position. You can unmute, Ms. Morgan.
Thanks. I was just being moved into as a panelist. I'm the Virginia coordinator of the American Promise, and we basically support this bill. It's been pending for years. As you know, it was finally redrafted in last year's bipartisan joint subcommittee to address the concerns laid out on the Senate floor last year, pizza consumption being the exception. And I thought that it adopted federal standards, and I guess that has been taken out. But it addresses the important issue that frivolous complaints that were mentioned and brought up by legislator and moves Virginia forward in terms of good governance legislation. So we support this bill, and thank you very much.
Okay, and we've got Janet Boyd, if you'd like to tell us your position briefly.
Yes, the League of Women Voters of Virginia supports SB 463. We are particularly pleased that the unique nature of child care expenses is addressed in this bill and included in the definition of campaign expenditures. Additionally, we hope that you will consider expanding this rule to include all dependent care expenses as was done in West Virginia and Vermont. Thank you.
Okay, we've got Sarah Haig, if you want to unmute.
Good afternoon. Hi,
Hello.
my name is Sarah Haig. I am the political director of Vote Mama Foundation and here to speak on behalf of the organization in strong support of Senate Bill 463, specifically in support of the provision included in the bill that would allow candidates to use campaign funds to pay for child care expenses directly incurred as a result of campaign-related activity. In 2018, Vote Mama's founder and CEO, Luba Gretchen Shirley, petitioned the Federal Election Commission and became the first woman to receive federal approval to use her campaign funds for childcare. This groundbreaking decision was approved by a unanimous bipartisan vote. Over 50 federal candidates have since used their campaign funds to pay for childcare, both moms and dads, Democrats and Republicans. However, the ruling on Luba's request does not apply to candidates running for state and local office. Vote Mama Foundation is the only organization working with legislators across the country to introduce legislation to approve the use of campaign funds for childcare by state and local candidates. We know that the first step to empowering a diverse pipeline of working parents to run for office is for candidates to no longer have to consider the cost of dependent care in weighing their decision to run. Our country needs middle and working class representation now more than ever, and campaign funds for childcare breaks down a critical economic barrier to working caregivers running for office. 15 states have now passed legislation allowing the use of campaign funds for childcare. We hope Virginia will become the 16th state to pass this legislation. We urge the committee to support Bill 463. Thank you.
Jessica Mott, please unmute and begin your testimony.
And my name is Jessica Mott. I'm with the Virginia chapter of American Promise. Virginia is one of only 2 states with no restrictions on personal use of campaign funds. And a recent poll by the Watson Center shows that 73% of Virginians support restricting personal use of campaign funds. So I agree with the points that Nancy Morgan has already made, and I urge you to support this bill.
Okay, next.
Karen Greenway, please unmute. Karen. Mr. Chairman, I believe Karen Greenway has stepped out.
Okay, Mr. Millhauser, Bill Millhauser, you'll be our last speaker.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. I strongly support the passage of this bill. Regulation of personal use by politicians of campaign funds is just a basic requirement of any campaign finance program. And as mentioned before, Virginia is only one of 2 states that really hasn't taken this on. And I do appreciate the complexity of the issue. I understand that this may not be all that many people hope for, but I think it should be a step forward. I urge you to pass this bill out of committee. Thank you very much.
Okay, Senator Bell, I had an inquiry from a member of the committee, being that the substitute is rather lengthy, as to whether you'd be amenable to having it go by for the week. We've heard from the public now twice, but members of the committee have. It does have to go to finance. If this is next week, would we still have time to send it through to finance?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Vogel.
I'm pretty confident, and I don't want to do anything to put the senator's bill in jeopardy. I've carried similar legislation, and I very much would like it to pass. Rather than kind of go through the nitty-gritty of this right now, because there are, I think, a couple of questions that could be answered and resolved, but I think doing it right now is probably not that practical. And if the patron would allow it, I know finance will meet multiple times, so I'm pretty confident that we will absolutely not, it won't compromise his bill in finance if we can take it by. Nobody's trying to hurt it, but it's really important that just a couple of these issues get resolved.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Spruill has a question. Senator Spruill.
That's my concern. I want to make sure that we will have time to hurt again before they get to finance. I don't want to hurt again, and finance will not be able to hurt. So,
as a member of finance and Senator Vogel as well, we will work with Chairman Howell to ensure it's heard. In fact, we can have someone who's watching check with her office beforehand. Yeah.
This is not the first time we have had bills come before us and been passed out to this dais, and we have heard it right then. So what's the difference between before and now? This is not the first time that we ever had a bill. You say, hey, I haven't had time to read it.
Well,
this isn't the first time you're doing this in years.
This is rather lengthy and had attracted some controversy in the past, and I think people, I'm assuming everyone wants to vote for it, but would like to be comfortable with the way this approach the substitute takes. And if we take it by for the week, we have a chance to speak with Senator Bell in case there's any, we don't want either loopholes or things that are unintended.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, I'll make this easy. I have no problem taking it by for the week. And if it will help the committee, I'll just tell you, if you look in the areas that are specifically called out where a campaign contribution would not be appropriate, or campaign usage would not be appropriate, to lines, starts on line 364. And what was on the original line 365 is a clothing purchase that was deleted. And then also the food item was deleted as well, because again, that was questionable, lots of if, ands, and buts. And then at the end of it, again, in the area with the state board of election, or the federal elections, that part that starts, I believe, on line 506 was where it was deleted. The rest of it remained the same, but it's a long bill. I agree with you. There's a lot in here, and I want to get it right. So I'm willing to take it by. I have no problem with that.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Bell. We have another bill from you. If staff wants to call Senator Obenshain and tell him that his, since we have election audits, two bills, not really related, but we can take up Senator Obenchank's after Senator Bell's. Senator Bell, you had a bill on risk-limiting audits, SB 370.
Mr. Chairman, do we have to vote on it when we bypass?
I'm sorry. Do we need a motion to take it by, or is it without objection? Unless there's an objection, we'll take the other bill by for the week.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Bell, you have the floor regarding SB 390.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine is SB 370. Senator Obenshain, is 390.
Oh, I apologize.
So this is a bill on the risk limiting audits, and we've heard on other testimony, other bills today about people questioning election integrity. Forensic audits are very expensive, and frankly, I think are not always called for. Risk limiting audit does a sampling and provides greater, I think, confidence in elections, which is something I think we all want. But obviously, we need to do it in a way that uses resources responsibly, allows for deeper dives in cases where practices or procedures or inaccuracies are found. And that's what we're seeking to do here, is to bring greater confidence. We have worked with the stakeholders extensively to address concerns. And obviously, there are issues with conducting some of these audits in the larger populated areas. Fairfax is the one we've worked with very extensively on this, and we've addressed a few things. So with that, I should say we need to move the substitute, which was part of the work we did with stakeholders, and I'll clue you in on those areas once that's moved.
Okay, so is there a motion to adopt the substitute to second? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so all in favor of accepting the substitute for SB 370? Or moving the substitute, we'll say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the substitute is before us, Senator Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The areas in lines 100 through 118, we did quite a bit of changes there, again, to really cover the issues with the different stakeholders. We worked heavily with Fairfax County, Virginia Majority, and a number of other stakeholders to make sure that the wording was correct and that we addressed different circumstances. And honestly, we could not come with a timeline with a bigger county that made sense for Fairfax County in a presidential election. The good news, we don't have one of those coming up right away. So that's why we put at the end of the bill an enactment clause, and the plan is to come back with the procedures for that next year, because we couldn't reach that this year, but we could reach the solution on the rest of it. But the idea here is to use a well used procedure across the United States that will add integrity to our elections, and at the same time try to use the appropriate amount of resources to do this. I think there are some stakeholders here who would like to speak to the bill, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions you or the committee might have.
Okay, and I think that I had an amendment to the substitute prepared, but why don't we, is there an amendment handy? Can you state what that amendment is?
Mr. Chairman, so on line 135 of the substitute, after the word department, insert at least one member of the local electoral board representing each party shall participate in the risk limiting audit and be present for the duration of the risk limiting audit when ballots are being selected and counted and calculations are being made.
Okay, so that amendment would see that it's members of both parties would be part of the audit. Is there a motion to accept that amendment?
So move.
Second. Okay, all in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, if I could speak to that.
Yes.
I think that's a good amendment, makes the bill better. Unfortunately, we got it at a point where we couldn't get all the stakeholders together. We don't know of any disagreements with that, but we felt it was best to approach it at the committee. So thank you for moving that amendment.
Okay, so just to be clear, all in favor of the amendment will signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the amendment's adopted. Then you had members of the public here, I think with some expertise in this topic who wanted to
Mr.
speak.
Chairman, before we get to testimony from
Senator
the public, Senator Bell, who pays for this thing?
Mr. Chairman, the public would pay for it as we pay for our elections. But again, it's been done in a way where we've tried to protect the resources and have a great respect for cost.
So, Mr. Chairman, no outside entities pay for it. It's all coming out of state funds. Is that?
Well, or
localities.
local electoral board.
Right.
But my understanding is that they're doing risk limiting audits now. This is just a more sophisticated approach.
But, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. It would be localities as well. There is no fiscal impact for this. The fiscal impact was preliminary, but they said there was no budget amendment necessary. But there are risk limiting law audits. But to your point, this gives it much greater clarification and goes into details to make sure there's a consistency.
This was requested to go to finance in spite of the fact that there was not a fiscal impact stated. But why don't we have our experts in attendance live come approach and let us know what you think of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak on behalf of this important legislation that further enhances the election security in Virginia and has been mentioned here today, gives Virginians needed, justified confidence in election outcomes. I'm Dr. Audrey Malagon. I'm a professor of mathematics at Virginia Wesleyan University, but I will not bore you with the details of the mathematics of the audits today. I'm here just to support Senate Bill 370 on behalf of Verified Voting, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization focused on elections and where they intersect with technology. We serve as subject matter experts and best practice resources. And we believe that SB 370 and its House companion, HB 895, will build on the successful pilots of risk limiting audits that have already been conducted in the Commonwealth, thanks to the dedication and hard work of local election officials, registrars, the Department of Elections, and all they have done to further election security here. SB 370 uses best practices for verifying that the election outcomes tabulated by machines are in fact accurate. This bill would ensure that post-election audits actually check the outcome of the election by examining a random sample of voter verifiable paper ballots. This legislation does not attempt to overly prescribe procedures. It leaves flexibility for a variety of methods, from those that are already in practice to others that could check batches of hand-counted ballots against machine totals. It does, however, ensure that the information that is actually collected in the audit can do more than just validate individual machines are working correctly. What risk-limiting audits do are provide evidence that the machine tabulated outcome can actually be trusted as accurate, or in the absence of such evidence would actually use the voter verifiable paper ballots to determine the outcome prior to the certification of the election. The risk limit and other details in this bill are in line with what the Department of Elections has done in previous audits. You'll see other auditing bills before you in this committee with common goals of ensuring that Virginians can trust the outcomes of their election. But Verified Voting supports SB 370 because it is built on best practices for ensuring that voters can trust the election outcomes. I want to thank Senator Bell and Senator Vogel for their leadership and their co-patronage of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question, because I know you were involved in this development of this bill. On the substitute on lines 178 to 180, it says that notwithstanding the provisions of subsection F of a code section in the Code of Virginia, as created by this act, the risk limit for all risk limiting audits conducted pursuant to the subsection shall be at least 10% for all such audits held prior to July 1st, 2024. And I'm wondering why we limit it to 2024. Shouldn't we just embed that in the code, and then if we want to change the percentage, address that later as the General Assembly?
Mr. Chair, it is not typically best practice to put the risk limit in the code, but to leave that up to regulations or to guidance documents for that flexibility of changing, perhaps as the Commonwealth has more practice or more experience with these. But to address issues of workload, particularly in larger jurisdictions, putting that stipulation in there for the first 2 years, we thought would address concerns about that.
Would you, and I'm going to ask Senator Bell to weigh in, would you object to just striking held prior to July 1st, 2024, so we can, in a few years, if we find out that we need to fine-tune it further, we can just add that?
I will just point out, as I'm thinking about answering that question, that in actually the audits that have been conducted so far, the reports that I've read from the Department of Elections, they would have cleared actually a much lower risk limit. I believe under 5%, maybe even under 1%. So this isn't the 10%, I think, addresses workload issues, but I don't even know and 10% is common best practice, so we're not opposed to a 10% risk limit,
Okay,
no.
because the reason I ask is just because you can go and re-audit these to get down to 1% or less than 1%, and I just think I'd be a little bit more comfortable if we knew that if 10% is the best practice, that we adopt the best practice, and then we can come back if best practices change.
10% is a pretty common one. If you think of it as a hurdle, that's what you're
Yeah.
trying to clear. And if you look at the audits that have been done, they have vastly surpassed that hurdle. So I don't think you necessarily need to set it there. But we're comfortable with it. 10% is a reasonable risk limit to
So
set.
I would ask
We
Senator Bell if he'd be comfortable with deleting held prior to July 1st, 2024, and we can always come back in 2024 if need be.
Mr. Chairman, I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, is there an amendment to strike those words on line 180?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
to you, don't you want to make sure that we agree with that? I know you're the chairperson.
Okay, well, our members of the committee like to discuss it
Don't you
rather.
want to see that we want to do that or not?
I'd like to hear whether the members of the committee have comment first. That's a good point. Is there any opinion on that potential amendment? Or a motion?
I move the amendment.
I'll second it.
Okay, so the motion is to keep the enactment clause 4, just getting rid of the date at the end of it. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so we'll have that amendment. Okay, are there others in the public you were waiting, sir, patiently to speak?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bob Shippey. I'm Vice Chair of the Henrico County Electoral Board and a member of the Virginia Electoral Board Legislative Committee, and it is on their behalf that I speak. We are not opposed to the bill. In fact, we support risk-limited audits. Our concern, and maybe the patron can tell me that this has been addressed because I was trying to scan the substitute, was when the risk-limiting audit would be conducted. In the original draft, it was going to be during the election cycle. Okay, has that been addressed?
It says on of the substitute, if I'm reading it correctly, correct me, Senator Bell, that the provisions shall become effective on July 1st, 2023, where there are other provisions that become effective. Actually, let me ask the clerk or Brooks what the effective date is, because there are several dates in here.
If I may, if the question is when would the audit itself be conducted,
Yes.
it's a pre-certification post-election audit, so it would happen between election day and certification.
Yeah, there's some concern from the Electoral Board Association that the resources involved in carrying that out are the same resources that are trying to certify the election. And we already have many other processes to make sure the election results are correct. And so I'm not sure if there's a solution to that, but I did see some dates altered in the substitute, so it could be that has been expanded to the point where it's physically possible to do it without taxing resources that are very heavily taxed during the election.
Mr. Chairman, we did make an adjustment to address that concern in the substitute. I believe that if you look at, there's a few areas, line 158, it was an adjustment made there. But we did address that concern to the best we could.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
In line 158, okay. Okay. Are there others in the room who'd like to comment for or against the bill? Are there any virtual speakers who feel compelled to weigh in?
Mr. Chairman, there are 2 speakers wishing to speak virtually.
Okay, if you could briefly state your position and your name. Ms. Robbins, you're first.
Thank you, Chairman Evan. Allison Robbins, Director of Elections and Chairperson of the Legislative Committee for the Voter Registrars Association. We appreciate Senator Bell working with our association on this legislation. While VRAV has chosen not to take a position on the bill, we share concerns regarding staffing and resource requirements for risk-limiting audits. And we support the amendment that codifies the 10% risk limit. We feel like that is a good limit for us to have. We have one single concern that's still not clear to us is related to what happens in 2024. And we look forward to continuing to work with the senator to have risk limiting audits in 2024 for the presidential election. We're unclear if this bill would allow that. Thank you.
Would Senator Bell or Verified Voting like to comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, that was the reason that we did put one of the enactment clauses in. So we couldn't come to an agreement on the timelines, particularly for the very populated areas of Virginia for a presidential to meet the timeline. So that's why we actually delayed it with the idea of coming back next year on just the presidential to address that.
Okay. Thank you. Are there other, I think we had another public speaker, or was that right? Did Ms. Gerchik speak?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So, ma'am, you're with Verified Voting?
Yes.
So they do the actual audit?
No, they're promoting this bill on the concept of risk limiting audits. Do you want to explain further?
Yes, we serve solely as a resource on best practices. We do not come in and conduct the audit. The audits that have been done in the Commonwealth have been done with local election officials. All the ballots stay in the possession of local election officials, local election officials, or the designees are examining the ballots. It is not a third-party audit that comes in. Best practices are to continue what the Commonwealth has been doing.
Senator Reeves.
So I'm just trying to find out, so you're a nonprofit 501c3, you guys no one pays you money?
We are a donor-funded organization, but we do not receive money from the state, from the local election officials to work for them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just add in there, the bill does cover chain of custody.
They're different, but yeah. Okay. We also have, was that the last public speaker, or has Ms. Gerchik spoken yet? Ms. Gerchik, did you want to unmute and weigh in?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Lisa Coteen-Gerchik from the League of Women Voters. The League supports SB 370, which provides in detail for the routine conduct of risk-limiting audits in Virginia's elections. Risk-limiting audits are the gold standard of post-election audits. Audits of voter-verified paper ballots that are randomly selected would be conducted by local elections officials under the supervision of the Department of Elections and observable by the public. Every locality would be included in the audit at least once every 5 years. The audits would be completed before certification by the State Board of Elections so that the public could be confident in the election's results. The Commonwealth and localities successfully conducted a series of pilot audits, the statewide audit of the presidential and vice presidential races of 2020, and recently 2 House of Delegate races. League members observed and even participated in many of these audits and find that the process works well. Risk-limiting audits are a sophisticated, statistically accurate means of confirming correct election outcomes within a reasonable time frame and cost. We urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, before we take up a final vote on Senator Bell's bill, there is another audit bill, which is these bills could both coexist, but Senator Vogel had suggested that we hear from Senator Obenshain just on his bill so people know what the difference is.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I have Senate Bill 390, and I guess they could coexist, but Senate Bill 390, I think, fulfills the purpose that the risk-limiting audits seek to fulfill. Both of these bills have the goal of promoting voter confidence in the accuracy and integrity of the elections. However, risk-limiting audits, they have been tried, I think, on a pilot basis. The reviews I've heard have been mixed at best as to their efficacy and utility. They are expensive, and considerable resources are being expended to conduct these risk-limiting audits. As one of the speakers pointed out, they take place between Election Day and certification, which is a tremendous drain on resources, particularly in jurisdictions with large numbers of voters. This bill takes a different approach, and what it does is it does not, it is a audit bill, but an audit of the scanners, of the machines themselves. This audit would take place for each machine at least once every 5 years, similar to the proposition that every jurisdiction does a risk limiting audit or is subjected to a risk limiting audit once every 5 years. This makes sure that every machine is subjected to a machine audit once every 5 years. So each jurisdiction is going to be auditing 1/5 of their machines every single year. The resources required by this are infinitesimally smaller than the resources required by risk limiting audits. The clerk is charged statutorily with keeping the ballots. This can be conducted either by taking those ballots after the election certified. This will not, cannot be used, will not be used to upset or change the outcome or to promote or prompt a recount. But after the election is certified, those ballots can be taken off the shelf in the clerk's office and run through the scanners in order to test the accuracy of the scanners. Or it can even involve the use of a test pack of ballots that would be run through the scanners. As you will see from the impact statement, the resources required are significantly less. There is no budget amendment required. It is not going to take the kind of state resources or local resources that would be dedicated to a risk limiting audit. I do have a speaker lined up in the event that you have questions, but this is a simple approach that achieves the same purpose without the expenditure of resources and without taking the attention of our election officers away from the important task that they have between Election Day and certification.
Okay. Before we hear from your speaker, are there members of the committee with questions of Senator Obenshain? Sarah Boysko.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Senator Obenshain, my understanding from my local folks is that there's a pretty rigorous test of the machines before each election. They make sure that they're working. Why do we need to do this?
For the same reason we are talking about doing a risk limiting audit. We have elections that take place after the initial test of the machines. This is going to make sure that that ballots are run through after the election, after certification, in order to give that confidence that each of these machines is subjected to rigorous testing. Every one of the machines is going to be subjected to this. It's more rigorous than the pre-election testing that is conducted.
So to clarify, each machine each year, 100% of the machines are tested before the election in some way, but the test that you want to have of each machine once every 5 years is different.
Yes.
It's a different test. And is that described in the bill how it's different, or do you want to explain how it's different?
Well, it is, it is different in part, and I may get Dr. Wheeler to explain that, but in part it is different because of the availability of actual ballots that have been used in an election. You can run those ballots
Okay, so
through.
different than the pre-test, because obviously before the election you're testing fake ballots or not fake ballots, but sample ballots rather than
That's
real
right.
ballots.
And it is, I think, more complex when there are multiple issues on a ballot. And this, this allows the testing of those scanning machines for that.
Okay, and did you want, members of the committee, before Dr. Wheeler speaks for his bill, were there any further questions for Senator Obenshain? Okay, so you have a witness, Dr. Wheeler, is that it, right? Okay. Dr. Wheeler, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, Mr. Chairman, congratulations on your new role. This bill gives us everything we want in election explanation. It's simple, it's inexpensive, and it's easily understood by the voters. Simple meaning, as Senator Obenshain explained, the ballot boxes are pulled from the clerk's office after the election has been certified. They're brought to a room where the optical scan machines are housed. The ballots from that particular machine are run back through the same machine to see if indeed the ballot count is the same. This is done by the electoral boards and the registrar and the registrar's assistant, possibly the chief and assistant chief officer of election from the precinct involved. It is as easy as it could possibly be. It's cheap because all of those people are already paid anyway. There's no additional expense, with the possible exception of driving the ballot boxes from the clerk's office to the registrar's office where the optical scans are held. And it's easily understood by the voters. They can see that you're putting the ballots back in the machine recounts, you get the same number. Hopefully you get the same number. That's why it's being done. This is not smoke and mirrors. It's not PhD level statistics. It's not pulling 3 ballots out of 15,000 and saying, oh, they represent all the ballots. This checks the machines so that everyone can understand that the machines are counting the ballots accurately. As Senator Obenshain said, you can do a test deck. You could have the same type of procedure that Senator Boysko referenced for the logic and accuracy that's done on a smaller scale for all the machines before the election. You could run a test deck of 25 ballots back to the machine to see that it produces. So it's simple, easy, and it's extraordinarily inexpensive.
If you could wrap up, I want to see if members of the committee had any questions for you, Dr. Wheeler. Were there any questions for the witness? Okay. Is there anyone, now that we've got both bills, we've heard both, it's my understanding they could coexist or we could adopt one or the other. Is there anyone in the elections community who wants to testify that they want one or the other who's in the room here today? Do you want to testify why one is better than the other or if they're both valid?
Verified voting prefers the approach in SB 370 for a couple of reasons. One, we are looking at verifying the actual election outcome. So we're making sure before an outcome is certified that we have just done a spot check on the actual paper ballots that the voters cast. We believe that gives the voters confidence before the election is certified. And we think that in most cases that's going to be good news. The machines worked, and we want to get that good news to the voters as soon as possible. In the unlikely event that it is not good news, you do have time to correct it and use the paper ballots as a recovery plan. We support logic and accuracy testing that happens before the elections. This is not a SB 390 does not have a bad practice, but we prefer this approach.
Yeah, Senator Boysko.
Could I ask Audrey a question? Sure. How many votes do you need to be able to count in a risk limiting audit or anything to feel assured that you have the right result?
So in the statewide audit of the 2020 presidential election that was done, they counted 1,372 ballots statewide. And that was enough given the margin of the election. For closer races, you may need to look at more. And just to address the question of resources and how many ballots, what a risk limiting audit does is it strategically allocates your resources so that in really close races, you're checking more. In wider races, you don't need to check as many. So it balances the resource question nicely.
Okay, just to clarify, Senator Bell's bill actually repeals the section that Senator Obenshain's amends. So, depending on what the will of the, we can have either one of these bills or both of these bills. Is there anyone else in the audience who feels compelled to tell us why one is better than the other? Okay, so is there a motion on either bill from a member of the committee?
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman,
Chair.
Yeah.
there are a couple people on Zoom wishing
Oh,
to share
oh,
an
I'm sorry.
opinion.
Okay, so let's hear from Lisa Gerchik. If you want to unmute, Ms. Gerchik.
Ms. Garchick, you can speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The League of Women Voters opposes SB 390, not because there's anything wrong with conducting a post-election machine audit, but because machine audits do not substitute for risk-limiting audits. We in Virginia already subject every ballot scanner to logic and accuracy testing before each election, as Dr. Wheeler said. And after the election, the only way to find out whether the election's reported outcome reflects the will of the voters is to audit the ballots, not the machines. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And we have Ned Jones.
Ned Jones, please unmute and begin your testimony.
Yes, I'm here to speak about the risk limiting audits, which are truly a waste of time. The lady just explained to you that the sample in the 2020 presidential election, out of 4.4 million votes, 1,200 were in the sample approximately, which is 0.0273%. That audit didn't prove anything. These audits are run by two left-wing operations. They are definitely not nonpartisan, called Verified Voting. And then Voting Works, another organization, provides a program called Arlo, which is used in the risk limiting audit. Risk limiting audits are expensive and do not prove anything. I urge you to support the other bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So we have before us two vehicles that, with some question as to which is the preferred vehicle.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Bell.
Yeah, if I could just make a quick closing remark.
Please.
First, I would say we do audits as a normal part of our practice for income tax returns, for credit card accuracy, for any number of transactions. And it's very expensive to do 100% audit of anything. Statistically, if we look at elections and the margin of victory, that's why you can determine how many you need to do to have a statistical accuracy. And there's a mathematical correlation that's been validated. It was said that these aren't that accurate. That's just not true. In Colorado, Maryland, and Michigan, these have been used and been found to be very accurate, high 90% accuracy when compared when a full recount is done. So I would just, to the committee, say that this is not something that has just been pulled out of the air. There's quite a bit of testing that has gone into this. And it's a method to make sure we have a good procedure, a process that's consistent. With that, I appreciate the time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So we've heard from both bills. With Senator Obenshain's bill audits the machinery once every 5 years. Senator Bell's bill seeks to ascertain if the election before it was certified from a random sample of a smaller size is accurate based on mathematical modeling. Is there a motion on either bill?
Mr. Chairman, I move that SB 37 be approved.
Okay, there's a motion to approve SB 370. Is there a second to that motion? A motion and a second. Okay, so we will vote first on, report and refer to finance.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so we'll vote first on SB 370. All in favor will vote aye.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Okay, so that bill reports 10-5. Now we have, still have before us Senator Obenshain's 390, which is not necessarily in conflict. The question is, do you test the machines after the election or before, or just before, or before and after in some cases?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, I would move that we report the bill. And I think that if you consider the testimony that we've heard, and because I think it's critical to have attention to machines, and if you consider that once every 5 years, I understand what's been discussed with respect to the protocols that are already in place, but I believe that running actual ballots through actual machines is a very wise thing to do. It certainly makes a big difference. It is the process of recounts. We watch this happen all the time, and I would tell you that from experience, there is great value in doing this with the machines, and I would urge the members of the committee to support the bill, and I would therefore move we report the bill.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second to report SB 390 of Senator Obenshain's. All in favor will...
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Second, substitute motion.
Okay. What's
PBI
that?
the bill.
Okay, so there's a motion to PBI. Is there a second to that?
I used to like Senator Sproul.
I know.
Oh, okay, so that's been seconded now. So the motion is whether or not the SB 390 is to be PBI'd. Vote aye is to PBI the bill.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ayes 9, no 6.
Okay, that bill fails to report.
Mr.
Thank
Chairman, that saves me a little time moving forward for the next few weeks. I appreciate the courtesies.
Well, we appreciate the education on the machinery. Thank you. Okay. Now, we've got members of the committee have bills. Senator Vogel's got several. Delegate McClellan has one. Yeah, Senator Vogel wants to, asks if she can go first. Is that amenable? Okay. Which bill did you want to start with?
Mr. Chair, I'll start with Senate Bill 697. And by way of background, in 2020, we passed legislation that would allow for same-day registration. And in the ensuing time frame, I've had a number of conversations with a number of election officials around the Commonwealth of Virginia who, as all of us are on P&E, have an extraordinary amount of opportunity to visit with folks on these issues. And I concluded at the end of this discussion that there were a couple things that I could do to respond to some of the things that were raised. One, I could attempt to, during this legislative session, go back and fix some of the issues that were identified. They're practical, they're logistical, and that wouldn't repeal same-day registration, but it would make an effort to fix some of the things that were raised. The second option would be to repeal it. And I didn't think that that was actually what this body would want to do. The third thing, and this is what I'm bringing to you today, is to delay it, is to give us, just moves the date 1 year out, which would give us an opportunity to have the Department of Elections and some of our registrars work through some of this process. And I could bore this committee with a lot of details and a lot of information that has been relayed to me, but I think for purposes of expedience, I would just tell you that that's my solution, and I think there may be people here who could speak to that, but I think giving us the extra year would be quite helpful.
Okay, thank you, Senator Vogel. Are there members of the panel with questions of Senator Vogel? I might ask one. You've got some things that you believe are fixes. I've heard from the Board of Elections, they feel that they're ready to do it this year. Are you open to the fixes that you suggest, but not delaying the start of the?
That was, Mr. Chair, if I may, that was the problem, is that there was a long litany of things that were raised, and because it was unclear to me how it was going to take a little bit more work, and very likely I could screw it up. That was, to be quite honest, I was concerned that some fix would have unintended negative consequences, and I didn't really feel like that in the time frame that we had leading up to this bill in particular being considered, that I was confident that those fixes would be perfect and that everybody would agree. Okay. So I felt like if you had the extra time to work it through, and that was in consultation with election people and election officials smarter than I felt like that was probably the safest. That was my safe harbor.
Okay, so Senator Vogel, then the other language on lines 16 to 24 and on lines 103 to 105, you don't feel comprehensively fixed what you see as the problem? The changes other than the delayed effective date, you're not confident that those would
No. All my bill does is change line 356 and just changes from July 1, 2022 to July 1, 2023.
Okay, and my understanding is that this bill was not prepared by DLS. Was it drawn from a bill from a previous year?
It was basically what happened was it wasn't prepared, and it was late in the process. It was my fault. So all we did was pull it up and change that.
Okay.
And the clerk said it was okay to submit, correct? Brooks, or
Okay,
did you do
we
it?
may need to substitute if it passes.
Yeah, we have a substitute. Do you want to? We have a substitute we prepared.
Oh, you do have
that
a
just says
substitute?
that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry. I didn't realize we didn't have the substitute introduced. So I would like to move the substitute. That's okay, Mr.
Mr.
Okay.
Chair,
Yeah, Senator McClellan?
I understand we're trying to be more environmental friendly and everything, but if we could have substitutes printed for us going forward.
Let me ask Brooks, is that possible for next week or for after crossover that we, and after crossover, that we could print the substitutes?
Yeah, if the patrons agree ahead of time to do that, that's fine. But for confidentiality reasons, I can't print everything necessarily. So that's just a matter of the patrons.
Can you print them and not release them until the patron gives them out at the meeting, or if need be?
I mean, that's what we used to do.
We could do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move forward with that practice. Thank you for that suggestion. Okay, so there's a substitute to be adopted. Is there a motion for the substitute to be adopted for 697? Is there a second? Okay, all in favor of adopting the substitute will say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Braun, is there any substantive difference with the substitute, or is it just drawn to code section slightly differently?
Mr. Chairman, so the substitute removes all the substantive provisions of the bill and simply states that the second enactment of Chapter 1153 of the Acts of Assembly of 2020 is amended and reenacted as follows, and then that second enactment reads now that the provisions of this act shall become effective on October 1st, strikes 2022 and inserts 2023.
Okay, so what we've got is a simple policy choice whether to delay same-day voter registration by one year or not. Are there members in this of the audience in this room who would like to speak for or against that? Please approach the podium if you would. Okay. Are there people virtually who'd like to speak for or against the bill? Please raise your hands virtually.
Mr. Chairman, we have one speaker, Allison Robbins.
Ms. Robbins, please unmute and let us know what you think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Allison Robbins, Director of Elections, Wise County. I'm with the Voter Registrars Association, and we support the extension in time for the implementation of same-day registration. Giving us another year to work on this will allow us to have hopefully a new voter registration system, and will give our association and the Department of Elections more time to fully investigate and implement this important legislation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Piper, you had indicated at a previous meeting that you felt your department was in position to implement same-day voter registration later this year. Is that the case, or is anything that we should be concerned with?
No, Mr. Chairman, we're working to implement the same-day registration for this year. Certainly, if the body wanted to delay it a year, we'd be ready next year.
Okay. Are any members of the panel have questions for Mr. Piper? No? Okay. So is there a motion to either, any motion on the bill?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there any other motions? Okay, all in favor of reporting SB 697 will vote aye.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
No.
Ayes 6, noes 9.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. That was a good shot. Okay, the next bill I have is Senate Bill 744. This also came to me as the recommendation of someone who has worked and been a leader in the elections community. And I think the longer that we labor over some of these issues, the more convinced I am that this is actually a very good decision. What this bill would do was create a bipartisan legislative group that would be charged with looking at election administration and making recommendations to the legislature. So much like we have other groups that work throughout the year and can consider some of the issues that we labor over here and try to do before this committee and do it in a very compact time frame during the legislative session. This would give us the opportunity, like the Crime Commission, to have smart, invested parties who are election experts consider a number of major election issues and then make recommendations to this committee so that instead of having a multitude of bills that may, take 7 different approaches that are really good, that are all good solutions, if that body could work together, it might make our work better. And so that's what this bill does. It's a 15-member commission, 7 from the House, 7 from the Senate, or actually appointed from each, but it includes 2 members of the Registrars Association, 2 reps from the Electoral Board Association, and then legislative members as well as citizen members. And so that's what the bill does.
And they would hire staff, I guess you have a budget amendment for
Yes,
that?
it would have staff, yes, and this will obviously have to go to finance and to slug it out there. But that's the goal.
Mr. Chair.
Senator McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I haven't been able to pull it up yet, but does this include this provision similar to what we have for other commissions where for something to be a recommendation, it has to receive a majority vote from the legislators from both the House and the Senate?
Brooks, tell me what this one, hold on, let me look at it and see. No compensation.
I don't believe the provision.
No, I don't think that's not in here.
Mr. Chair, I think that provision is pretty standard for our commission, so I would move that we insert that.
Yeah, I would second that.
There's a motion and a second to amend the bill with the concept that any recommendation to be forwarded would have to have a majority vote of the General Assembly members on the commission. All in favor of that amendment, do I say an aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the bill is amended.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Spruill.
this commission would be same like when we heard from the citizens as far as having members of the General Assembly that we would fix to have our precincts drawn to our liking. And then it was said that we would have citizens to involve. So we created some legislators and senators. And that's what happened. It's messed up. It went to the Supreme Court, and now we're in a mess because the members who were part of the General Assembly and the citizens could not work it out, and it went to the courts, and we are in a terrible mess. So we're doing the exact same thing by having elected officials from the General Assembly and the citizens to try to work this thing out.
Well, Senator, I would just say that some of the members are designees of groups like the Electoral Board Association or the Registrars, but there are some just regular citizen members, I believe, too.
Right, Mr. Chair, if I may just respond to that.
Senator Vogel.
When I chaired this committee previously, we had occasions where we had some rather sticky issues to deal with, and the members didn't believe that we were going to actually be able to do them during the time that this body had to meet. So we would convene a group of people that had more time to hear testimony, had more time to have, and certainly it wasn't just members of that body. Anybody could come and participate and listen. And I felt like we just had more of an opportunity to, we were just better informed by the time that we got to session and had more of an opportunity to understand what it was we were dealing with and how we needed to address those bills. So I understand what Senator Spruill is raising and why he would have that fear, because certainly it would seem that maybe there'd be some partisan rancor, but the goal wouldn't be that. The goal would be to bring real problems to the commission so that they could actually work through them and consider what might be the best options to bring to the legislature for things just like, every bill we're hearing today.
Okay. Are there any other comments from members of the panel?
Mr. Chair.
Senator McClellan.
Yeah, I don't see this as much different from the Crime Commission, the Joint Commission on Healthcare, the Commission on Youth, with one exception, and that is, I think, a lot of those commissions have very heavy volume. This one may not have as much volume, so I don't know if we want to perhaps put a sunset at some point or not, but I think the goal of this is just to say, if there are issues that we don't have time to address in a 60 or a 40 or a 45-day session, we have somewhere to send them so they just don't sit in another world until someone else brings a bill.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, Senator Vogel.
I think for two reasons. One, it would make our work, I think this committee could work more efficiently if we had an opportunity to have some things have been considered before it actually comes here and at least have been fleshed out. Because there will be lots and lots of issues where there will be 100% agreement if you've had the time to work it through. That's number one. Number two, I think it would also give those of us who are on this committee or who work in and around the election issues a place to perhaps even send people. So when they bring you complicated or more complex challenges, rather than try to work through it on your own with one or two other legislators and maybe legislative services, if you had a larger body to consult that might be able to collaborate and work towards consensus, that would be the goal. So that's why I offer this. And I know there is at least one person in the queue who wanted to speak to it.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Sproul.
I would like to know exactly how will the registrars, what are you going to call them, they be selected, because they are political opponents like everybody else.
Well, they have a...
Wait a minute, Mr. Chairman, let
yes,
me finish.
sir.
So my concern is this. So how do I know that they're going to appoint the registrars more Democrats or Republicans? I know they are doing their job, but I know in Chesapeake and in the Western Tidewater, we know that we get to pick those. We pick Democrats, they pick Republicans. So when you put this thing together, so how I know that when you pick those registrars who will be part of this thing, how I know that they are not more politicized one over other. So you're playing politics by having them to do that.
Well, Senator Sproul, the registrars are generally nonpartisan, although they're selected by the local electoral boards.
In what state?
The registrar is someone who administers the elections, who's agreed to by Democrats and Republicans locally. The electoral board member is a member of a political party. So that would be the person that would have a more partisan affiliation. I don't know if there's further.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Vogel.
if I may, if it would give Senator Sproul some comfort, I would just remind him and the members of the committee that this group wouldn't have any authority, would have no binding authority. They would just have the opportunity to work through issues and bring suggestions and propose solutions to us, and perhaps have more time and more depth and more opportunity to hear from experts than we do. So I know often I do feel that I am not always as well informed as I could be, because just in the few weeks that we have during this session, there are a lot more people that I would like to have their input, a lot more time I'd like to have to work on something, but often they bring it to me literally at the beginning of session. And so I think it would encourage people who wanted to have really substantive and meaningful discussions about legislation related to election laws in Virginia to perhaps bring those a little earlier, encourage that conversation, in advance of session, so that, again, we might get some consensus. Because, again, I also believe we have a lot of things where we agree. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Senator Mason wants to make a motion, but I'd like to first hear from the witness or members of the public. Was your witness virtual or so?
I think so. Oh, no, maybe not.
Okay, here we have a witness in the room. Let's start with witnesses in the room, and then we'll go to Walt.
Hello, I'm Barbara Tabb. I'm the president of the Electoral Board Association, and we obviously support this. Don't need to tell you how complicated, how much change, and how much the effect of the changes that are made impact every one of our elections. I think the electoral board members and the registrars are in a very unique situation to bring some insight, some thought, and even some suggestions for legislation that's going to be needed, or legislation that may have an impact you all don't understand. And I think that this is a very good step in helping us all understand where we need to go and what a change is going to be.
Okay, and there are witnesses online. Are there no other one in the room wishes to speak, I assume? So let's go online to Mr. Latham.
Good afternoon. Yes, I had talked to Senator Vogel about this and the value that something like this would be to look over bills. I I think, like Senator Vogel said, a lot of what you all look at is a difference of when you have disagreements, a lot of it is differences of opinion versus principle. And having a long view of being able to come up with solutions that are good for Virginians and that won't change as much from year to year, I think would be very helpful. It'd be a good place to send people and to develop a kind of a cohesive approach to what people want Virginia elections to look like, instead of having a mad rush every year to try to see what bills have come up and then figure out problems, and then after the fact find out that there was something that didn't match up with something else. So this would be, I think, a good advisory body for the privileges and elections committees, so that they would have more information to make decisions and feel better about them.
Thank you, Mr. Gert. Thank you. And now we have Ms. Gerchek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The League of Women Voters has a few reservations about this bill and urges a little caution. The structure of the commission would be evenly split between the political parties, suggesting that it could work in a bipartisan fashion. And the League would indeed welcome bipartisanship. And on its face, a commission like the one proposed could serve a very valuable purpose in developing legislation. We just want to be cautious about developing an impasse if there were some sort of split because of the split between the two parties. And the final question is to make sure that the commission is doing something that is not already within the province or competency of Jay Lark and the State Board of Elections Advisory Review Work Group. If there's an overlap in the function, that needs to be clarified. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, move report.
There's a motion to report and refer, but I did want to just ask one quick question. Mr. Piper, is the State Board of Elections Advisory Group, how would that differ from this? Who's on that advisory group?
Mr. Chairman, that is the state board itself appoints the members of that group, and I'm struggling to remember exactly how that is, but Ms. Gerchik is a member. There are members from the electoral boards, registrars, and other third-party organizations involved in elections. But it's just an advisory. I mean, not to downplay it, but it's an advisory work group. It obviously doesn't have
any legislators is the main difference.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Spruill.
So to him, so this will not have an effect on what you were talking about, this board?
It wouldn't, Mr. Chairman, it wouldn't have a direct effect on the advisory work group, no.
Okay. So we have a motion from Senators.
Move report, Mr. Chairman.
Second. Okay, to report and refer, and a second. And
Mr. Chairman, question?
Yeah.
Every time something motion, you keep saying refer. Do we have to send everything to?
Well, this calls for staffing a new commission with state funds, and finance has requested it. And if there's no budget for staff, it doesn't exist unless it was staffed by elect. So I think it does need to go to finance the way it's written now.
It's mad. I thought you had some on your arm automatically every time something. Wait, let me finish. I don't care about you agree. This is my question. I'm just concerned about it. Every time something comes forth, make sure we can send to a finance. And I want to know that this had to go to finance. That's all I want to know.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. So the motion is to report and refer to finance. All in favor will vote aye.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Okay.
Ayes 13, noes 1, 1 abstention.
Mr. Chair, I got one last one.
Okay.
I appreciate the committee being patient, and I can make this super quick. This is one last effort to solve a problem. You will recall that in the most recent election, we had some questions regarding how absentee ballot applications were being treated with respect to Social Security numbers, the last 4 digits of the Social Security number. And as you all know, 24.2-701 says under C1 requires that an application include the last 4 digits of the applicant's Social Security number. 24 2-706 says, in viewing the application for an absentee ballot, the general registrar shall not reject the application because of an error or omission relating to the application if it's not material in determining whether the individual is qualified to vote absentee. Without belaboring this, it has been unclear, or at least every registrar that I know of said it wasn't unclear. They were very clear about the requirement that the last 4 digits of the social security number had to be there. They were treating it as material. We had an issue in Northern Virginia where it wasn't, and then suddenly you had every registrar in the state except for one treating it one way and one treating it another. I talked to that one registrar as well as countless others around the Commonwealth and said, what's the solution? They all said, please come to session with a solution, with a clarification of the language so that what you do not have is any ambiguity. And I know that there are registrars here who can probably speak to this better than I, who've had a lot more experience in actually handling these and, managing this process of absentee ballot applications and whether or not they're accepted. So all this does is, in line 110, 109, 110, it says the applicant's failure to include the last 4 digits on the application shall be considered material omission. That clarifies that. And then above in line 71, it also strikes language that says an applicant completing it in person shall not be required. And there may be, I think it would be good if the committee just took 1 minute to hear from maybe the registrars, anybody who wants to speak to it. I don't know if Walt's gone, but could clarify why it's been an issue and why everybody believed it was one way except for one registrar.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Sproul.
A question to the
Senator
senator. So I have seen when the petition, folks saying, well, you don't have to, you have to. So are you saying that you have to?
So, yes, Mr. Chairman, what I'm saying is that the way it's being treated right now, whether I say it or not, every registrar in the Commonwealth of Virginia now says that the code is clear. They believe that the code says emphatically that the last 4 digits of the social security number must appear on that absentee ballot.
Thank you, ma'am.
To the extent that there is any question and that the language is ambiguous, there was an occasion this past election where one registrar said, well, no, actually, I'm going to treat it differently. That raised all kinds of concerns. So to the extent that there is any ambiguity, I just want to clarify it. I'm not looking to change the current law. I'm looking to clarify it.
Mr. Chairman, she's a lawyer. Please, let's abstain.
Okay, before we hear from the witnesses, I did just want to point one change. Line 71 and 72, right now you can show your ID when you absentee vote in person, but if we adopt this, we would, an ID wouldn't be enough. You'd have to have the last 4 of your social accurately presented. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, it was interesting because I was just reading back through my notes. The only thing I had requested was 109 and 110. That was what I had requested. The applicant's failure to include the last 4 digits shall be considered a material omission. That was the only clarification that I had requested because I think that solves the issue. Maybe Brooks can speak to 71 or to 72 and 73.
Mr. Chairman, so
maybe the registrars.
Before we hear from Brooks, Senator Sproul, what was your question?
I see what she's saying. So now you're talking about in person. You was doing something different. In person, you have to show everything anyway. So why do you need that? The second
right,
point?
But I'm totally fine with that language, Mr. Chair.
She's saying that she would be willing to amend it so that if you present in person to absentee vote, you wouldn't have to show your social number.
Yes, sir. I'll be fine. Thank you so much.
Brooks, I don't know if you want to address that.
So move.
Okay, or is that, okay, that's an
point.
amendment, I guess? Is that an amendment, Senator Vogel? Or Senator Sproul?
Yeah, the second part was saying that and show up in person that you don't have to because you got to give it to them anyway.
So Senator Vogel, is that a friendly amendment to unstrike line 71 and 72?
Let me ask a question of anybody who's here representing the registrars. I just want to make certain. Right now, what we're doing is we're striking, and it says the applicant completing the application shall not be required to provide the last 4 digits. I want to make certain that we hear from some other folks here who.
Okay, let's take public.
I don't know if I want to do that.
Okay, let's take public comment first from registrars or others in the elections community. Those in the room.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, James Heal with Fairfax County. The registrar that Senator Vogel is actually referring to is from our county. We will want to note that we explicitly asked for guidance from the Department of Elections before we instituted this practice, and they sent written guidance approving our practice of determining whether the missing last four was actually a material omission. So currently what happens in Fairfax County is that if a voter does not put the accurate social security number or misses filling out that box, there is a robust process of calling that voter, emailing that voter, making sure that any missing information of that application is verified. Actually, Senator Boysko was the patron of the legislation that allowed for that practice, and that's why we asked that you oppose the bill.
Okay, so are you saying that if someone left the last four off their application to absentee ballot, that you would phone them and make sure it was accurate?
Yeah, we send emails, faxes, call. There's this extensive process to verify.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator Reeves.
why is Fairfax County the only entity in the whole state that does it that way?
Well, they just said that they got guidance from the state board, but wanted
Mr. Chairman, my
to
question, though, is why are they the only county? Out of all the counties, Fairfax County is the only one. Why would Mr. Piper, I see you, why would you give guidance separate of what the rest of the state's doing?
That's North Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, the question had never come to us before Fairfax County brought it to us. We consulted, as we do on all guidance of this nature, in-house with the Attorney General's office. It was determined that leaving the last four digits off, according to the code as it exists today, did not represent a material omission if you could identify who the voter applicant was. That's why we gave it.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Vogel.
And I'll tell you the reason. I actually, in fact, did discuss this with the registrar in Fairfax County and spent a fair amount of time working on this with other registrars. The concern is it really becomes an equal protection issue. You cannot have one place treating voters one way and then entire rest of the Commonwealth of Virginia treating voters differently. And what you have are very different outcomes for very different people based on the same election, the same piece of paper, and in every place else in the state, those are being set aside. And I called a number of different registrars and said, Fairfax County can do this. They believe that they can do this. Are you going to behave in a way that's consistent with Fairfax County's reading of the law? And they said, absolutely not. The code is 100% clear. So I think that, and that's again why I bring this here, it's a solution to a very real problem, and that is that there is not agreement among the registrars on what's legal and what's not legal, notwithstanding advice that Fairfax County received. Other registrars do not believe that. And so whether we agree or disagree on policy, I'm not looking to change policy. I'm looking to adhere to what every registrar in the Commonwealth, except for one, has believed is the law and tells me they're emphatic about that. And they are not intending to make any changes. And so I think fairness is critical. One standard across Virginia, whether we agree with it or not, we should pick one and stick to it and enforce it evenly among voters. Some voters shouldn't be disqualified from voting, while others who behave the exact same way are allowed to vote. So I feel like this is something that we should address, and I don't know if there are any other
Mr. Chair.
registrars who'd like to speak.
Senator Mason?
Would the Senator Falk here yield for a question?
Yes, absolutely.
So why not fix it? Why say it's out in the law? Why not give them the ability to cure it if they can do so in the time allotted to where you're solving other problems after the election? So,
Mr. Chair, if I may, and having that discussion with the registrars around the Commonwealth, the goal was to take out the one sentence that made it ambiguous in anybody's mind. And in my view, fixing it was just clarifying the last four digits of your Social Security number. I understand that they all want a way to identify that voter and that they believe that that's material. So if there are registrars who'd like to speak to that, I am doing what I was asked to do. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Mason.
So just to be clear, you think, so I see what you're saying, this clears it up, but the registrar cannot do what Fairfax was doing.
Correct.
Do you have an objection with clearing it up and allowing the registrar to do what Fairfax was doing?
Because that's changing, that would be an affirmative change in the law that I'm not prepared to make, because I haven't discussed that with the registrars around the Commonwealth. 99.9% of the registrars have a certain set of protocols, have acted a certain way, and believe that the law is what the law is, notwithstanding guidance that was received by the Department of Elections, they're not abiding by that guidance. They don't believe that guidance is accurate, and they don't believe that that's in the code.
So it seems.
So I'm not looking to change it and repeal that requirement. I'm just looking to take that language and say, it's material.
So thank you, Senator Vogel. So it seems
That's
to me
up to the committee.
It
Thank
seems
you.
to me we have a policy choice, which is to have consistency by adopting Senator Vogel's bill, or to ask the Board of Elections to make their guidance consistent and known to registrars across the Commonwealth. Are there any registrars or people in the elections community here? They're virtually. We have 3 who would like to speak, starting with Allison Robbins. If you could let us know whether you favor the bill or oppose it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hold on one sec. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Allison Robbins. I'm the Director of Elections for the County of Wise. I'm with the Voter Registrars Association. I've spoke to Senator Vogel about this. We urge you to support and pass this bill, eliminating the requirement that voters provide the last 4 of their social on absentee ballot by mail requests. Eliminates a crucial part of our ability to effectively identify the voter who's requesting the ballot. I mean, the last 4 of the social, as we talked about in a bill that passed last week, 40-0, related to witness signatures, is a crucial part of ensuring that we've identified the correct voter. So we urge you to accept Senator Vogel's bill and move forward, making it very clear that the last 4 of the social is needed to identify voters to ensure that we mail ballots to that correct voter who has requested one. Thank you.
And I'm going to ask the speakers to be brief because we still have another bill from Senator McClellan, I believe. Ms. Wheeler, if you could just let us know briefly if you're for or against and why.
Mr. Chairman, don't please give her the same amount of time to give everybody else, because she just talks on and on.
We're going to ask all the witnesses to be brief. Thank you.
I shall be very brief. I completely agree with the previous general registrar and with the coming registrar, and certainly with Senator Vogel. This is an equal protection under the law. All voters should be treated in a uniform fashion, and that's what this bill does.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Latham?
I have nothing to add to what Allison Robbins said. Thank you, though.
Okay. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Could I ask the gentleman from Fairfax a question?
Yeah, Mr. Heel?
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask, I'm sure you didn't get in touch with every single person that did not have that number. What was the process after that, and was it the same?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senator McDougall, in the department's actual guidance, it's referred to as the GREB handbook. There's a section that talks about best practices when it comes to trying to verify whether a voter is eligible if there's missing information. And this is the practice that we follow. If information is missing from an application, an absentee ballot, try to collect the missing information by phone, email, or fax for anything other than the signature. Indicate the name of the person providing the information, the date, and initial the form, or attach a copy of the fax or email response. If no one can be reached within 3 business days, deny the application. That's how we proceed.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
so can you tell me how many applications that y'all accepted versus how many you denied?
So we don't actually keep track of that. We don't have a count of it, but this is not just for the last 4 digits of Social Security number. People, leave off their zip code or whatever on the application. So we do this for all different types of issues on the application.
Unless it's specifically noted to be a material omission in the code.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Spruill.
Mr. Chairman, this is not a Fairfax bill. I'm not concerned about Fairfax. I'm concerned about the whole state.
Yes.
The whole state. Women, don't come off. I want to make sure, like Senator Vogel said, that we either make a rule for the whole state, not just Fairfax. I'm never going to run for governor, so I know I will lose their votes. But I want to make sure that whatever we do is for the whole state, not just carve out the other Virginia, as Fairfax are called. So I'm not concerned, Mr. Chairman, that I think Senator Vogel is exactly right. It should be, that's that the last 4 digits, that's what you're saying, that's it, and it should be for the whole state. Because I have seen in Chesapeake that when you absentee ballot, some get it and some put on it, some don't. They just take it. If you got it on there, they take it. If you don't, they take it. So let's make one rule for everybody.
Right. So we're either going to be passing her bill and having it very clear on one rule, or allowing the handbook of the Virginia General Registrar Electoral Board handbook, which outlines the practice that Mr. Hio mentioned.
Second, Mr. Chairman, since he's here, also the second part that she was talking about, that when I go in person, we want to get rid of that because that's already done, right? I believe. So do we have to make a motion, Mr. Chairman, the second part that she was saying that's not needed? Because when I go in person, you got to show everything anyway. So why do we have that in there, the second
Right.
part?
That can be amended if you choose to.
Since the board got a problem with that part, when you go in person, that's already done. So we don't need that in your bill. So, Mr. Chairman, we need to make a motion to remove that part?
That a motion would be in order if you'd like to move.
So
to
move.
remove the language of this unstriking lines 71 and 72.
Since
Is there a
both of us-
second to that motion?
Senator Bogan, that's okay with you?
Fine with me.
Okay.
Okay, there's a second to that motion. All in favor of that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Mr. Piper, did you want to comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time. I just want to clarify something very clearly. This guidance was not just provided to Fairfax County. It was not just for Fairfax County. It was guidance provided to the Department of Elections for the entire state. Fairfax County, to Senator Vogel's point, was the one that was utilizing that guidance, and it appears, and I haven't, personally spoken to all the registrars about this specific instance, but if it's found that other localities were not following that guidance, that's fine. I just want to be very, very clear that this guidance was not just for Fairfax County. Thank you.
A question to him, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Sproul.
So, then what happens then, let's say, that's clear, and we got that, but let's say I forget to put 23325. I put my name and so forth. Will my ballot be turned down? If I put down, I live at 593 Lawndale Crescent, but if I forget to put 23325, will my ballot be rejected?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we're talking about applications, absentee ballot applications, but the point was made earlier, if it's not material or stated very clearly in the code that it's a material omission, then the opportunity for correcting that is available through the application. I was just pointing out that our guidance is provided statewide.
All right, thank you.
That's it.
Senator Mason.
So, Mr. Chairman, this bill goes, if you leave off your zip code, you can be contacted and square up your zip code. Any other omission, you can get it squared up for your application for absentee. But the last four digits, you will not be contacted, and your absentee ballot request will just not be completed. And until you figure it out and contact them,
Well, you could be contacted and told that your application was invalid, but Senator Vogel.
Senator Vogel.
So, Mr. Chair, that would be considered material, and you have to have that corrected. So that's the issue. And just to get back to the underlying challenge that I'm trying to address, again, is not to make new policy, but to solve something that I think is a huge issue in the Commonwealth, and that is there are registrars for whom, and many registrars for whom I've had this discussion, and I've showed them the handbook, and I've said, here's the issue. Fairfax asked for guidance. Fairfax was given this. Fairfax acted this way. How can we move forward in Virginia with one locality doing it one way and everybody else doing it the other? And in fact, it was very relevant in a statewide election like the one we just had. And I think when registrars said, no, I don't read the handbook that way, and that's not what the code says, and let me read it to you, they were, unequivocal in their position. And they said guidance may be guidance, and they may be using that, but that is not what any other registrar is using. Sure. And so I bring these to you not because any of these are partisan or because I have any nefarious intent. I bring these to you because people involved in elections around Virginia have asked me to fix something. This is the best and simplest way to fix it that I know of without upending everything and coming in and asking every registrar in the state to go along with a whole new policy. That's not my goal.
Last
My
question,
goal is
Mr.
just to
Chairman.
clarify it.
Yes, Senator
So you
Mason.
level the playing field. Good call. So, but the registrar's office will still be able to reach out to the voter and say, you have a material omission on your application. You need to come in and fix it.
Mr. Chair, there's nothing to prevent the registrar's office from saying to someone, this is incomplete, it has a material omission.
Yeah, the difference is they can't accept it by email or phone, that they would have to physically come in or throw out the application.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I thank you, Paige.
Thank you, Senator Mason. So is there a motion or further discussion on the bill? Okay, there's a motion to report as amended. Is there a second to that motion? Second. Okay, motion is second. All in favor of reporting SB 652 will vote aye.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ayes 11, noes 4.
Okay, the bill reports. Now, Senator McClellan has been very patient. You've got SB 495, and I understand there's a substitute.
Yes, there is, Mr. Chair.
Okay, is there a motion to adopt the substitute for SB 495?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Well, is there not? I'll second it.
Yeah,
For the
second.
sake of discussion. Okay, so all in favor of adopting the substitute will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Okay, the substitute is before us.
All right, Mr. Chair, what Senate Bill 495 does is reform our recall process in several ways. Currently, there's one code section that deals with recall and removal of both appointed and elected officials. There are several recalls underway in Virginia, some of which have been brought under pretty vague grounds, and a group of people got together, looked at all of the other states' recall laws to look at how do we reform Virginia's recall to be less likely to be abused, to be very clear on what grounds for removal from office are, that make the removal of an elected official at least as burdensome as the election of an elected official, and take the removal of an elected official out of the court's hands and put it in election process. So that's the gist of the bill, but let me walk through a couple of things that the bill does. So first, for grounds for removal, it would keep in place that if you are convicted of a felony or adjudicated by a court mentally incapacitated, that you are automatically removed from office, both appointed and elected. And that makes sense because to run for office, you have to be eligible to vote. And if those two things had happened when you tried to file for office, you wouldn't have been able to run for that office to begin with. So it leaves that in place. For elected officials, it removes the very vague language as a grounds for neglect of duty, misuse of office, or incompetence. There are no definitions there. Some people can view this and say, well, I don't like the way you voted on something that shows you're incompetent, so I'm going to initiate a petition to remove you. And frankly, for elected officials, if you're incompetent or negligent, the voters can vote you out. It leaves as grounds for a petition. There's certain misdemeanors, if you're convicted of now, you can be subject to a recall, so it leaves those in place. But if you have committed a crime against the locality or office that you're serving, that would also be grounds for a petition. So that's the first change. Second, it increases the threshold for the number of petition signatures from 10% from the previous election to 30%. And then third, as I already mentioned, for elected officials, it takes it out of the courts and it puts it in an election, a recall election. That's the gist of the bill.
Can I ask when the recall would be held?
I'm sorry?
When is the recall held? Is it just held upon certification of the petition as a special election, or is it in the next November election?
I think that's in the bill that it.
204.
What?
Line 204.
Line 204, yes.
The court shall order it within 90 and 150 days of the date of the order. Okay. Senator Spruill's been
Yeah,
patient.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have the bill in front of me. This also includes local government?
Yes.
Because Senator Lucas has a bill that deals with local government, and he got out of the committee 3-2.
So Senator Lucas's bills are specific charter changes dealing with charter provisions that already cover removal from office. What this is doing is currently in state code in Title 24, there is a provision for removal of local and elected officials. So this is covering that, not the specific charters for specific recalls that may be in a charter.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Are there other questions from members of the committee? I would ask Senator McClellan, right now, what percentage is required for a recall election?
10%.
10%
You have
of
to have a
those who
petition.
voted?
Yes, and this takes it to 30.
Okay. And this would apply to local elected officials or constitutional officers as well as general, is it apply to the members of the General Assembly?
On line 176, it says this article shall apply to all elected Commonwealth, constitutional, and local officers and officers appointed to fill a vacancy in those elective offices, which I believe is what the title, which the current code applies to now, right, Brooks? So it doesn't change who it applies to.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Senator, that is correct. The Constitution provides for the removal of members of the General Assembly, so that's where they're exempted here.
Okay, and if I could just ask Brooks, does this apply to our federal officials? Like, it wouldn't apply to governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, because those have specific impeachment provisions.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. Those specific provisions in the Constitution would.
So no federal officers?
Right. And no federal, correct.
Okay, is there any other member of the committee who has a question for Senator McClellan? Are there members of the public who would like to weigh in the room at all? Okay, are there any virtual? We do have a speaker virtually. Louisa Boyarski.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Louisa Boyarski. I live in Arlington, Virginia, and I'm representing the Virginia Grassroots Coalition. And our coalition created a working group to actually look into this to see what other states are doing for their recall elections. And what we found was that there's only one other state other than Virginia that uses a court hearing to determine that an elected official should be removed from office. And so I recommend that the power really be returned to Virginia voters. If they voted this person into office, they should be able to choose to remove this person from office. And that is one of the major provisions of this bill. And so I urge you to vote for SB 495. And thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Jack Corrali. If you could let us know your position.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Jack Corrali. I'm from Fairfax County, and I support this bill really for two main reasons. One is that, I mean, as everyone on the committee is aware, there's a pretty rigorous process to get on the ballot. I think that the process should be as rigorous to remove someone from office as it currently stands. The way that it works can vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and that does not serve the elected officials or the people trying to remove them at all. It's not transparent. And I think under Title 24.2, the Department of Elections is qualified and adept at issuing guidance to standardize this across all localities to make sure that this is an accountable and transparent process. The other point I wanted to make was I think everyone on the committee has seen the fiscal impact statement that says that it would not incur a cost at the state or at the local level. I'll actually go a step further and say that I think these reforms could actually save money, because when it's in the courts, it's sort of at the mercy of the lawyers, no offense, going back and forth ad infinitum at different levels to argue this out. I think putting it right to the voters to decide can actually streamline the process and cut costs in the long run.
Thank you. Okay, our final speaker is Kelly Price.
Hi, I'm a community organizer in the Other Virginia
quote unquote, up in Burke and Springfield. And I'm in support of this bill. It puts a time parameter around collecting signatures, which is pretty important. If that's open like it is now, you kind of have forever to do this. It also puts qualifications, requirements on the signer of the ballot too. So that's helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Sproul.
To Senator McCullough, I believe Senator Lucas' bill, the charter thing, I thought they brought it up because they talked about the fact that 2 or 3 times they had on the ballot to remove the mayor. That wasn't a charter change. To remove a couple of members of city council, that wasn't a charter change. So I'm going to vote what you want, but I'm just trying to figure out how that affect the bill that Senator Lucas picked forward. They got out of our committee 3-2, because the charter change you're talking about, that part of it, she was concerned about what was happening, that when council go into executive session, members of the council able to be on TV before they can get out of session. And so I know that she was talking about that, but also it was brought forward that they were just trying to throw people out of office for whatever reason. And I thought she was trying to stop that. So your bill would inquire that the 30%, and I'm trying to make sure that it doesn't have any effect on what she is trying to do.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
As I understand it, this bill has to go to Finance, and Senator Lucas is on Finance. My brief conversations with her, there is no conflict. I will ensure that there is not.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Report and refer to finance.
And that's second that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that's a valid motion. Before we vote on that motion, Senator McClellan, if I could ask you, what is the time frame on collecting the signatures? Is there a limit on that? I believe the speaker said there was.
Brooks, if you could point us to that line.
It is.
I believe it's on lines 307 to 310, perhaps. So there's a 30 or 45-day window, if I'm reading it correctly. Is that right?
I'm looking at the substitute.
Yeah, line 307 of the substitute is what I was looking at.
307. Yeah, mine's numbered differently.
Here, well, anyway, I see it, I'm satisfied myself, so I withdraw the question. So there's a motion to report and refer to Finance. All in favor, unless there's further discussion, all in favor will vote aye, or if they want to report to Finance, refer to Finance.
Senator Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ayes 9, no 6.
Okay. That is our last bill for today, I believe, and I apologize for the meeting going so long. After crossover, I'll try and dole it out a little bit more evenly.
Mr. Chairman.
We have one bill next week at least.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Mason, I'm talking about you. Senator Mason said, Mr. Chairman, that I'm statewide, but he want to make sure I was not statewide for the other Virginia.
Lady from Springfield doesn't like that.
Okay. Thank you. The committee will rise.